we'll continue on with this conversation. I just want to say it's 2000 here in the States. It is um, it's 0301 in Kiev. It's 1701 in Los Angeles, and it's 0101 in London.
Daryl, did you pull the plug
we,
on the wrong machine? You were trying to unplug the coffee maker again?
Hell
He
no!
crashed the space.
It's too damn late in the evening to be drinking coffee for me.
He broke the internet.
He likes to crash the space when he's hosting.
Well, let's just hope we get our folks back. They're coming in. Please.
It was certainly dramatic, Daryl.
Huh? Say what?
It was certainly dramatic.
The end. Lord. The end of the space as we know it.
Hey, but
no warning. No.
Well, let's see, Chuck. It's getting cold up here. We can at least go snowboarding at least one time before it all ends, right?
Daryl, I would go snowboarding with you, my friend, any day of the week. Let's go bust some big pow this winter.
You see me bust my butt more than likely.
I'll teach you, brother. I'll teach you how to ride that thing.
Hey, the first time I got on ice skates, I didn't realize I can't do a flip on roller skates. I did pretty damn good on ice skates. So, but anyway, folks, we know what happens. I'm just trying to get you guys back in, and we keep going. But what we were saying, Raver, good evening. How you doing, brother?
Oh, I'm on my way home. So I was just gonna pile in on what Chuck was talking about. When those tanks ran into that Russian artillery battery, the Russians keep a lot of artillery at the battalion level. The way their BTGs are set up, there's a lot of organic big guns. But those guns would be aware of the tactical situation. So if you see Ukrainian tanks hitting unaware Russian artillery, it means they're into the regiment or brigade area, and quite possibly they found a seam between regiments and brigades, and they're because Russian cross communication is so bad, they may have burst through one regiment and hit another regiment's rear, and they had no idea what it was even coming at them.
You know,
yeah,
I'm just thinking about the speed.
And we talked about everything that went wrong there, and that is communication laterally between Russian units and communication from the forward edge of the battle space to the command echelons, and they've got those problems. And as you know, they compound themselves very, very quickly. And we were talking before we blew up the internet about what's going to happen in Kherson, with the Russians readjusting their lines. And these are exactly the things that will plague even Napoleon's retreat, let alone, look, the generals that Putin has are the ones that he raised for the last 20 years, right? This corrupt, inept army, it's not Putin's problem. This corrupt army, this inept army, it's his legacy. It's his legacy. It has not been a meritocracy, folks. You play ball, you make money, you kick up to the top, you get your flag. And those people are not performing on the battlefield. And I just think we're going to see something in Kherson here soon. I may be wrong, but I'll take the lumps if I am.
Hey, Chuck, to pile in on you again in support, is Shoigu has been at the top for so long that everybody from, say, Captain Major on up is either a disciple of his or a disciple of a disciple of his. And so there's been no innovation in military thought, even amongst those officers who wanted to be professional, because the whole system is geared towards the theories and ideas of just one man.
Yeah, and you have probably done what I did. Look, I do my homework, right? I read their manuals, I read their doctrine. They're not following through on it. They're not fighting the way they're supposed to. we've seen several annihilations at river crossings. We've seen the Ukrainians just smash to pieces of Russian brigade task groups trying to cross a river because the Russians don't do what they're supposed to do. Those river crossings are supposed to be covered adequately by artillery, and not just artillery, but counter battery radars, so that if the Ukrainians locate the crossing point and try to smash it with artillery, that you as a Russian can start shooting quickly back at the enemy's guns. But it doesn't happen. And, not only does it not happen, they're losing it on the individual level. They're losing it at the rifle squad level. They're losing it at the vehicle crew level, because every week when they lose 100 vehicles, guys, 38 of those vehicles don't have anything wrong with them. They're abandoned by their crews on the battlefield, and you can't win a war like that.
One of the things I'm looking at here with this, the speed, and we know that the Ukrainians are using small unit tactics where they're fast, they're mobile. If they were to do this and they had, say, the Leopard, which can move as fast to support those smaller vehicles, this would be over. I mean, if they have reached the rear echelons of just using the light armor that they have, to prosecute that with tanks would mean that they would be, it would just take this battle to another level, to where they would be in the supply system almost, because we know that if they're doing like us, the supply line won't be up close. We know the artillery wouldn't be this close, but if they were to take that armor and be able to execute the same maneuvers that they're doing right now, we would be looking at a totally different battle.
Yeah, again, the morale of the Russian troops is, if it's not abysmal, it's pretty bad. We had just, I believe it was yesterday, perhaps it was the day before. There is a Russian independent Marine infantry brigade. It had recently been honored with the honorific Guards, which there is really no analog in the United States Army. But for those military listeners, I'd say it's roughly equivalent to the Presidential Unit Citation, which is the highest decoration that the United States military can bestow on an individual unit instead of a person. So these Russian Marines were essentially, they're as good as they get. But I watched a film. They had elected a spokesman who read a statement out complaining about the conditions of their service. Guys, the military is not a democracy. You don't elect spokesmen. You don't read a statement to your command. That's insubordination, and it's skating very close around the drain of mutiny. It's a felony. That tells me that one of the best units in what's essentially the Russian Marine Corps is mutinying on the battlefield. And that's just one unit. There was a shooting recently at a Russian rifle range. 22 people were killed. I lost count of the stories, how many times colonels, majors, captains have been punched in the face, assaulted, shot. You're not going to win a war like this. And you know what? You're not going to pull off everything that it takes to stage a brilliant fighting retreat and cross a river in the teeth of Ukrainian army that's hot on your heels. So I think we're looking at a big move here in Kherson.
Chuck, sorry, really quick. You're talking about like the Russian, we used to say command climate. There is no command climate there. It's just utter chaos.
You gotta-
It is from top to bottom. And, you know, there have been 12 general officers killed so far. These are guys, you know, major generals. I think one lieutenant general. Look, these guys shouldn't be within 50 miles of the front. That, as you know, that's not you know, that's not where generals belong. That's not where they should be. But in the Russian military, they cannot delegate any taskings. You've got a major doing what a sergeant major should do, or a sergeant first class. You've got colonels pulling triggers on the forward edge of the battle. That isn't where they should be. Again, that's what there's some huge systemic issues in the Russian armed forces.
We talked about the NCO corps. We talk about, you know, proper military schooling for the officers and the like, and you just have to wonder who is commanding those tanks, who is commanding those artillery batteries, who is telling the supply corps where it needs to go and what they need to do. And if those people are not on the same page, if they are not able to communicate, you have conscripts in tanks. They know left, right, you know, but do they know how to set up a field of fire? Do they know how to have a quadrant that they protect and they hold it? I mean, those are simple things. You know, you get into a foxhole, and that lieutenant comes around. Hey, guys, we're looking at this. This is yours. This is what I need you to do. And then he runs to the next one. This is what I need you guys to do. And everything works in concert to protect the line, to protect an area. And for that to just not be there, you don't have those officers running those. We've seen what their trenches look like. We've seen what their foxholes look like. There's nobody. And like you said, Chuck, the blind is leading the blind. And it's going to get more evident as this wears on. The solid troops, the ones that probably were regulars. When was the last time we heard about a regular unit that is not comprised of conscripts that's engaging the Ukrainians? That's one of those things. We're not seeing those anymore. They got obliterated from bad leadership.
Right, and we've seen with this mobilization that you're scooping people off the street and delivering them into frontline units. Folks, being a soldier is a profession. Everyone who's listening here has been in the military. It takes 6 months to teach you just essentially to do high pressure janitorial work. You get out of boot camp and you're not really a soldier, a sailor, an airman, or a Marine yet. You go in the Navy, you go on to an A school where you learn what all the services call a military occupational specialty, which means basically your job. And even if your job is being an O1 grunt Marine slinging a rifle, look, there's an additional 6 or 8 month school for that. You want to be a paratrooper, ditto, plus a couple of other schools. So when you're scooping people off a Moscow subway, delivering them to the front, they don't know what they're doing, right? They don't know how to use a map and compass. They don't know how to dig a foxhole. They don't know how to conceal themselves on the front. They don't know where to dig a latrine. They don't know all of the field craft, the little tricks of an old veteran. No, they don't know any of those. They don't know how to change magazines. They don't know what to do if their weapon jams. They don't know anything. So these guys are they're not replacements. They're not even cannon fodder. These are people that you can't count on when this stuff breaks down. You can't count on these people because they don't know what they're doing, because no one's taught them. And they're of no utility on the battlefield whatsoever. And when you start sending people like that into the front, you're hurting. You're hurting.
You know, you have to think about at this point, you have fresh meat, because that's all they are, meat, that's going to be shortly dispatched. The people at home, they are not really feeling this war yet still. We all see, yeah, everybody reacted when these folks, they took off and left because they didn't want to be conscripted. But to those folks that are left, they still are not feeling this as of yet. And I think it's when these troops start coming home, half in half, legs, arms, sight, it's going to be visual to them. And whether it changes the perception, whether it changes the people's minds, is yet to be seen. These soldiers that the Ukrainians have been repatriating back to Russia in these POW exchanges, what are they saying? And how can they affect this? Because they are seeing their short time buddy taken apart. They're seeing the vehicles on the road as they pass in one way or another, going forward and backwards, that are just totally obliterated. That we can only hope that this helps change what's happening back home. It's very, we love to think of this with a Western mind, that people care. But we know that the Russian mind is a little bit different. But at some point, it's going to have to come to a rationalization of what's really happening. These conscripts, they are not there for a noble cause. They've only been told what they have to do. And they're being told to shoot the guy in front of you if he turns. And that has to play a factor at some point. It's going to play a factor at some point. That it's kill or be killed, not by the Ukrainians. It's going to be by their own. And when will that guy turn around and say no more? And we hope that comes when the guys will say no more. That's Chuck. I know that's got to be a demoralizing thing when you see your enemy just knows that he cannot go anymore. And it's very rare that we've seen it, but we know it will happen.
Well, this might be a surprise to some members of the audience, but I don't know a SEAL who isn't a peacenik. War sucks. Wars are started by greedy, venal, psychopathic leaders. It's always the case with a war of aggression, which is what this is. a war to subjugate a nation. That's what this war is. Look, Russia just didn't invent under Putin some animus for Ukraine. Russia has always considered Ukraine a province in all the pejorative that word can convey. A lot of people I don't have to remind that in the 1930s, Stalin engineered a famine in Ukraine that killed 4 million people in basically 2 winters. This was a calculated mass death genocide before the word came into common coinage. The Ukrainians know that they're fighting for their lives. The Ukrainians have got a couple of successful offensives under their belts now. Look, they know they're fighting for their lives as a people, as a nation, as a culture. And on the other side of the line of contact, Russian soldiers, look, they're tired. They've been doing this since last November, and they just want to go home. They want to go home. And it's hard to use the crystal ball, but I see a Christmas offensive on the part of the Ukrainians. And I see that because the Russian soldiers are going to be at maximum misery. It's going to be cold. They're going to be homesick. They're still missing those 1.5 million uniforms that vanished from a warehouse in Russia. Their feet are going to be cold. Their supply problems are going to be worse. And that's when the Ukrainians are going to hit them. And they're going to keep hitting them and driving them back. We talk a lot about morale on this program. As a SEAL, the 2 things that I think are most important of all the principles of war are 1, surprise, and 2, morale. Surprise is something that the Russians don't have. When they concentrate their forces somewhere to project power, to launch an offensive, or to just move forward a couple hundred yards on the contact line, wherever those trucks came from, wherever those vehicles with all the antennas get parked, there's some Ukrainian looking at them and picking up a cell phone. And that information gets within 15 or 20 minutes, or maybe even 3 minutes or 90 seconds. It goes to a Ukrainian battery commander who drops heat on that location. The Russians can't do anything that isn't watched by Ukrainian patriots in their rear. We've seen it dozens, if not hundreds of times. Russian headquarters get hit. Don't forget that the chief of staff of the Russian army attended a staff meeting in Izium, and he got a free medevac helicopter ride all the way back to Moscow because he was wounded in the attack, along with 2 other generals and maybe 20 colonels and majors. They can't do anything that the Ukrainians can't figure out. And on the other side of the equation, the Russians have no idea what the Ukrainians are doing. They can guess. They've got some signals intelligence and some electronic warfare capability. But if they knew where the Ukrainians were concentrating, they would fire on them. But they don't. They don't. They lob missiles at Mykolaiv. They lob missiles at Kyiv. They lob missiles at Kharkiv or Izium. That's all they can do. That's all they can do is hit apartment buildings with Ukrainian-made suicide drones. Look, those are not targets of military utility. They're crimes. They're tragedies. They show the ugliest part of the Russian spirit, but they're not breaking the will of the Ukrainian people. And it's not those strikes, however horrendous they are, they don't affect Ukraine's ability to prosecute this war. So again, this is John Spencer and I talk about this a lot. We talk about this a lot. It's this war is looking more and more impossible for the Russian army, as it's constituted now, to win. I don't think it's going to be over. Look, Putin can survive almost anything, but not losing this war. So this war is not lost till Putin says it is. He's going to keep fighting. He's not going to come to his senses. There is no off ramp. This war has to go on until his people, Putin's people, can't or won't fight it anymore. And that's not inconceivable right now. That time is coming.
Thanks, Chuck. Daryl, I'm going to sign off for the night. It's been wonderful hearing you all. Thank you for coming to this space as many of you consistently do. Chuck, it's great to listen to you again. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, man. Always good.
So, night all, and Slava Ukraini.
God bless, mate.
Hey, Chuck, can I pile in one more time on you before I get out of service?
Absolutely, brother. Absolutely. I'm going to have to skedaddle here in a minute, but I'm happy to field one. Knock it out.
Yeah, so we all know the name of Bergdahl because what he did is so out of character for an American GI. And yet, the past week, we've probably seen more Russians seek out Ukrainians to voluntarily surrender than any number of Americans in all of our wars going back to 1776. So what does that say about all those individual acts of mutiny where they just say, I'm done?
Yeah, it's well, you know yourself, in the Uniform Code of Military Justice, Americans are not permitted to surrender of their own free will. And generally, Americans don't surrender because we have a little thing called we don't leave anyone behind. And with your brothers and sisters, you fight shoulder to shoulder. The Ukrainians have been very good at distributing information to arriving Russian units on how to surrender safely. In the old days, that was done by leaflets and playing cards and other little things you could get into the hands of your opponents. But in these days, the Ukrainians basically have 1-800 numbers. 1-800 I quit. Pick up your cell phone and we'll tell you how to surrender and what to do. And you're right. More and more Russian soldiers are doing that. And as the quality of replacements and reinforcements, the more unqualified, unmotivated, and frankly helpless individuals that Russia tries to shovel into the front. Look, these guys basically have no choice but to surrender. If you're listening at home and you've got no military experience, try to imagine this. You're on your way to work tomorrow on the subway, or you're getting on the bus, or you're walking out to your car in the driveway, and two guys grab you and throw you into a van. And they say you're in the Army. And 48 hours later, you're on the front line holding an AK pattern rifle. How do you think you'd do? What do you think your skills would be as a soldier? Really, if your sergeant tells you go over there to the east 2 kilometers and meet him at the road junction, do you know where east is? Do you know where 2 kilometers are? Do you know how to get there in a battle zone? Should you walk down the road, or should you stay in the trees by the road? Is that really east? Do I really know is this thing on safe? Is my magazine seated correctly? The more people you shovel like that into the battle space, they have no choice but to surrender. They have no choice, and they're going to surrender. And worse for the Russian commanders at the company level, at the platoon level, those companies now are down to maybe 10 or 15 guys out of 3 platoons per company, 90 guys per platoon, basically, or, I don't know, 30 guys per platoon. Now they're down to 10 or 15 guys. and you've got people getting off the bus like this, can you count on them? If you tell them to lay down a base of fire so you can move forward or back, can you count that they're going to do that? And you can't. So that doubt, that fear, the inconsistencies of conduct of those soldiers to the right and left of the whatever Russians are left on the front line, look, this whole house of cards is going to collapse. And it is, and we're seeing that.
Hey Chuck, I'm gonna let a few hands come in here and talk to you real quick. I know you're gonna go. How much longer you got?
I got about 15, but I'll shut up and answer quickly.
All right, Alan, go for it.
Thanks, Daryl. Chuck, always love listening to you. I know all eyes are looking at Kherson because we are expecting and hoping for some great Ukrainian victories. But if you look east, I mean, things are happening in Luhansk and Donetsk. The Ukrainians are closing in on Svatove, Kremina, and the Ukrainian defenders in Bakhmut appear to be holding on just as heroically as the defenders in Azovstal. If you look east, Chuck, what do you see happening?
That is a good questions. And I put up, I actually didn't put up an Izium access map today, but you are right. And if anyone has a map available of the Izium access, the river there going basically north and south is the Oskil. On the eastern banks of the Oskil, there is the P66 highway. I'm going to make sure I got my right numbers here. Goes north and south. Savatove is a very important junction point where rail and road lines come together. The Ukrainians are absolutely closing in on this. They've already severed one of the major highways to the north of it. Savatove and the city of Kremina are linked, and if anything to the north, and it looks like it's imminent that the Ukrainian forces are going to reach the P66, and when they cut that, Kremina will become untenable. It doesn't mean that the Russians are going to cut and run. We saw in Liman, they stayed too long. This is their MO. They receive political orders, not an inch back. They will fight stubbornly from these positions. Liman was an interesting case because geographically, there were swamps and lakes and oxbow lakes in front of it. It made it hard for the Ukrainians to assault it directly, but it was cut off and surrounded. At that point, the Russians fell back because they waited too late. They fell back in disarray, and there was a lot of people that got gobbled up by the Ukrainians. But I think perfect question and a perfect assessment. We're going to see action there. The things to watch are, as you said, Kremina and Savatove.
Yeah, just quickly, the only other thing I'd say is, we watch these terror attacks with missiles and forget that on the battlefield where Ukrainians and Russians are fighting, there are casualties, wounded and killed every single day. This is a real war. Maybe the Ukrainians are killing 6 Russians for every single Ukrainian soldier they lose, but this is a terrible, terrible war in the front lines. Ukrainian soldiers are being killed every day, and it breaks my heart.
I absolutely agree. This is probably not the place to say it, but I'm going to say it. My heart also breaks for the faces of the young Russian officers that I see that just weeks ago were cadets and midshipmen and are now on the front lines commanding a platoon. These boys shouldn't be there. They shouldn't be there. They're not sufficiently trained to lead a platoon in combat. They were cadets. They shouldn't be leading a platoon of Marines. They're midshipmen. This war is hurting Russia. It's not hurting Putin. It's hurting Russia. Look, we're up to 60,000 dead Russians since this invasion started. 60,000. That's more people than were lost in 10 years of the Vietnam War. And a very conservative estimate of 3 wounded to every dead means 180,000 maimed Russian veterans wandering around on the streets back in Russia. They don't have the VA, folks. These guys are a walking, talking, suffering advertisement for Putin's failure. That's why I brought it up. And these are things that are eventually going to weaken him politically.
And more than likely, these guys are not getting the checks that they thought they were going to get, even as a veteran. The economy is hurting that way as well. And so, shortages are going to come. And into the ethnic regions, it's going to come a lot faster. So they're going home hurt, missing limbs, this, that, and the other, possibly not getting a pension. For what? For one man's war. Not even their war. Because I'm pretty sure they wouldn't be fighting. They would be trying to earn a living. So, folks, I got Constantine here. I'm gonna bring him in real quick. Go ahead, Constantine. Go ahead, Constantine.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm sorry. I was looking for too long for my Twitter app in my phone. Anyway, Chuck, while you're here, I wanted to ask you, what would be your take on the long-term impact on of such a terrible losses that Russia is having, not only like you said, not only of those dead but also wounded. Asking this because we had I was born in 1980. Doesn't matter when I was born, but it was when I was growing up. We had Afghan veterans in Ukraine all around us. When you would go on the subway, you would see them without limbs, without with so many problems, with them being poor, without any penny, without any support. And I'm just wondering, it's not only you have one wounded, okay, and that's it. He comes back, and he comes back not alone. He comes back with entire wagon of the problem. So also those killed ones as well, their wives, their mothers. It's I think those things have to be taken into consideration. And my question here is, what do you think on that? Is it like because Russia is a large country of millions of people, and asking if this can have a really big effect, or it's just they can discard it because 100,000 people, well, who cares? We're gonna get more with people. Women will. We say this in former Soviet Union. We used to say, like those idiots would say, women would give birth to more, no matter how many die.
Yeah, it's a tragedy. It's a crime against Russian society. But Putin doesn't care, and his general officers don't care. The money that a Russian soldier makes, his pension is a pittance. And as we saw after the fall of the Soviet Union, changes in the currency, inflation, devaluation of the currency meant that these guys weren't even getting enough couldn't even get enough to eat, couldn't put a roof over their heads or their families' heads. Look, that's not a fair trade for an arm or a leg or an eye. And I don't know anyone who's gone into combat who hasn't come back with some sort of a wound or another, and not necessarily a physical wound. There is no way that you go to war and come back the same guy that went over there. It doesn't happen. So let's say the war were to end tomorrow. You've got 60,000 dead. You've got 180,000 wounded. In terms of what that looks in society, you could multiply that by, let's say, 4, right? So for every man of that family, perhaps he has a wife, he certainly has a mother and father, maybe he's got some kids. So 4 is a kind of number I like to pick, because guys have brothers and sisters, they have members of their family. So we're looking at 400, 500,000 families that are also wounded from this war. They're also wounded from this war. And these are people who are going to come home to what? I hate to say this, but you see this in society. A wounded soldier will come home from a war that was lost, and they're not always hailed as the conquering heroes. A lot of times society doesn't really want to have anything to do with them. This is going to be something that Russia wants to forget, not remember. But this war is not going to be without social consequences within Russia. These may not be consequences that Mr. Putin faces. He certainly, believe me, folks, he does not give a flying rat's monkey butt hug about this. He could care less. He could care less. But the effect this is going to have on the people who look to him for leadership, whether willingly or unwillingly, he is it, right? The state is him. The more badly this war goes, and the more inescapable it will be for him to shrug this off, because he's already gone through 9 commanding generals of this conflict. And eventually, in 50 years, he's going to run out of guys to fire. We've seen this since the Roman Empire. You have Caligula. You have the emperor. The emperor gets killed when the generals and the Praetorian Guard around him no longer feel that they're safe. That's when revolutions happen. And military defeat is the handmaiden of revolution. That being said, look, I don't think Putin's going to go away. I don't see a coup d'etat. His security is Secret Service times 10. He is absolutely paranoid, and I don't see him going away. But I hope and I pray that the situation is going to get politically tougher and tougher for him.
All right.
Thank you for answering that.
Okay.
Good question, Costi.
All right. Indie Gun, I'm going to go to you real quick. And guys, just remember, Chuck is he's fast approaching his minute. So if you would, just let's do this rapid fire. So Indy, Gunther, Leonard, and then you, David. Here we go.
All right, Chuck, I'll be pretty quick for you. We've seen in the past where the Russians had planted significant amounts of TNT or C4 mines under a dam in the Kharkiv Oblast. And there's a lot of rumors and suspicions about the Novokokka Dam. Curious what your thoughts are on that, what it might be, or is this just a bunch of fear-mongering?
Good question. I don't think it's going to be tactically smart for them to blow that dam until they've either reinforced themselves on the North Bank or managed to evacuate themselves. Turning the Dnipro into raging rapids isn't going to help either one of those things. But that doesn't mean that on the way out they wouldn't destroy that dam, which has use, of course, in making hydroelectric power. But I think another reason why they probably won't blow the dam, and again, I could be wrong, and it's almost impossible to predict what they're going to do. That dam is critical in supplying fresh water to Crimea. So if that dam is destroyed, it's turning off the water taps in Crimea. So I can't say whether they're going to blow that or not, but it would seem a little self-defeating to do that at this time.
That got you, Andy?
Yes, sir, it does. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Go ahead, Gunther.
Hey, Chuck. So it's such an honor to speak to you. So you mentioned that they're not the freshly brought in conscripts are not going to be an asset, but you could definitely argue they'd be really actually a liability and make things much more dangerous for the frontline troops. Like I can think of like friendly fire and not giving away positions as some possibilities. Could you maybe enumerate some other ways which they actually would be like a liability, and it'd just be better if they weren't even there in the first place militarily?
Absolutely. There are sort of a million of them. A lot of people use the word grunt disparagingly. For me, it's sort of an honorific, and you better be smiling if you call somebody a grunt. But to train an infantryman, it doesn't take a couple of weeks, right? It takes a year. There's lots of things that an infantryman has to know. The skills of an infantryman are to shoot, move, and communicate, right? So shooting, the least complicated thing an infantryman is going to deal with is his AK pattern service rifle. For an infantryman, that literally better mean that you can take it apart blindfolded. Everyone's seen that. It's on all the movies. Look, if you're in the firefight at night and that weapon stops, fighting at night, there are all sorts of blinding flashes, explosions, everything else. You have to do it by feel. That takes a while. Shoot, move, and communicate. Do you know how to use the field radios, the inter-squad radios, the company radios? Move. Do you know how to navigate? Can you navigate at night? You know how to use a map and compass? And these are just skills for a guy in a rifle squad. Let alone, do you know how to work a mortar? Do you know how to work the grenade launchers that come with that rifle? Do you know how to use the heavy machine guns? Do you know how to use an RPK? You know how to use these other things? Do you know fire maneuver? Do you know the difference between fire maneuver and fire and movement? Do you know how to routinely break contact? Do you know how to maneuver your fire teams? That's just for a grunt infantryman. You could see that takes about a year to get those people trained adequately. How about someone who's going to drive a vehicle, a tank, an infantry fighting vehicle? How about the weapons associated with that? It's communications gear. It's engine. It's transmission. So all these things, and you're right in pointing that out. These guys are not replacements; they're liabilities. And the more of these people that are shoveled in there, look, you're feeding weak links into the chain of command. You almost couldn't wish for a better end to your enemy, that they're going to put these people in. Okay, it's one thing to be uneducated and incompetent. It's another thing to not realize that you're part of an army. It's quite another thing to heap people together who think it's a good idea to elect a spokesman, write a list of complaints, and film it and put it on the internet. I see John Spencer's in the audience, and I think Colonel Spencer would probably have a few things to say about posting a video with your complaints. You know, look, this is insubordination, and it's essentially mutiny. You can't do this in the military. You can't count on these guys. Look, they're complaining about the chow and putting it on the internet. You think they're going to go forward under fire? Do you think you can count on these guys to do that? Would you like to be wounded out in front of the lines and count on these guys to come get you? No, they're not going to come get you. They're going to run away.
You know,
Yeah,
Chuck.
thank you so much.
You know, Chuck. I remember the joke back when these were the Pepsi generation kids. I don't know. I don't know. If that,
I remember those things, Daryl. I got called one myself.
so yeah, that was what we were called back then. So it was these are Pepsi generation kids, and you know, it was something that the old timers called. You know, they always have a name for you, and you have to prove yourself so that you know you can prove them wrong that you're not that. And this generation here, these kids that got their cell phones, um, they don't, and you know, just like the one soldier said, I don't care if they can track me. You know, the one that was speaking with his wife, um, some of them know it, some of them don't know it, and it's going to be to their detriment. So, um, I'm not going to run. I'm not going to run out the clock on you here. Let it go for it.
Oh, you know what? I just want to add one more thing too, which I remembered is also, if people that don't understand, it's very easy to burn up supplies if you're not, you know, ammunition, fuel, water. Like it's easy to like mess that up, and like, and that's like a huge liability. That's another one I just thought of. Anyway, thanks so much.
Appreciate it, Gunther. Go ahead, Leonard.
Thank you, Daryl, and thank you, Chuck. It's great of you to spend this amount of time with us and share your insights with us. But I have a question that came up a little while ago when you were going into some of the sort of say the motivational aspects behind the what we're seeing in Ukraine right now, and then just more generally, perhaps. And my question kind of comes out of the my own personal experiences. I had a very influential uncle who served on the USS Missouri, the Mighty Mo, and I had a chance to get some impression from him in terms of what the motivation that kind of drove him forward, and I think you've showed a lot of that to us on this site as well. The humanitarian aspect and the absolute commitment to cause. But I'm wondering if, looking at the way the Ukrainian army has approached this and the Ukrainian people, if you see any kind of a distinction between the humanitarian impulses, as well as obviously they're defending their very existence, but there also seems to be a spiritual component behind it as well. And Yehuda had showed some scenes or indications where we saw this kind of multi faith, if you will, sessions going on in the trenches. And I'm just wondering if, and you've obviously had opportunity to observe many men in many stressful situations, many varied combat scenarios. And I'm just wondering if you have an assessment based on your kind of personal experience as to how compelling those factors are in driving the man forward, so to speak, the warrior forward, to keep the battle going, essentially. So the humanitarian impulse, obviously, I mean, you've shown us a huge amount of that. And in terms of the spiritual component and so on, how important do you assess that is in what's happening on the battlefront in Ukraine, in terms of driving their success, and just more maybe in general, if you have any general comments as to how important that is in a battle force? and with the individual. So thank you for any insight you have on that. That's would be great.
Yeah, thanks. Good questions. Absolutely. You know, in terms of the spiritual realm, it's said with good reason that there are no atheists in a foxhole, and my own spirituality and religiosity has seemed to wax and wane the closer you get to the front line. But I think that it's pretty much universal that soldiers in contact, soldiers in combat, in daily combat, your world actually sort of gets smaller and smaller. You belong to a company that belongs to a battalion that belongs to a regiment, etc. But it basically comes down to the guys that you fight with every day, and let's just say that's a rifle squad. Rifle squads vary in size, but you know, you've got 12 guys. In the SEALs, we have this thing called swim buddies, and you have a shooting partner, and you either come home with that guy or you don't come home at all. And in contact with the enemy, your world gets smaller and smaller, and invariably, whatever the reason for this war is, you wind up fighting it for the men and women on your right and left. You wind up fighting it for those people that you fight with every day, maybe even more so than your loved ones back home. And the only fighting force that is effective is the one where you know, as a soldier, that you can absolutely count on 100% of the time. You can count on the men and women at your right and left to support you. The only armies that fight well are the ones that know, if I get hurt out here, I can count on these people to get me back out of contact. If I move forward, I'm not going to have to turn around and wonder if everyone else is following me. Sebastian Junger wrote about that. He called it the tribe. That's exactly what's going through their minds. Let's look at the other side of the coin. Let's look at a Russian rifle squad out there. They've been out there a long time. Lots of things go wrong every day for them. Their supplies don't arrive. Their ammunition dumps get blown up. Their fuel trucks don't make it. Their officers are remote, disinterested, veer between brutal discipline and micromanagerial tantrums. The people that you started this war with, most of them are dead now. And the people that are showing up here, they don't have any equipment. They don't have any training. They have no idea what they're doing. And they don't have any of the skills that are necessary to contribute to your effort or ever make you think that you can count on them. So on the Ukrainian side, you have an ever strengthening force, a band of brothers and sisters who are buoyed by their recent successes and know exactly what they're fighting for. And on the other side of the coin, you've got people that don't really know what they're doing here. They don't think they're supported from the top, and they know that in most cases they can't count on the people to their right and their left. And those are some big differences. Those are some big differences. And on one side, you've got how exactly to win a war, and on the other side, you've got how inevitably to lose a war.
All right. You put a lot into that last one, Chuck. Put a lot into it. And you think about people that you think about, individuals here and there. that you meet along the way. And, you know, it's when you talk about, you know, bringing them back, um, that's, I never had to, so I'm thankful of that. But you know, the people that you run into and they become your brothers, and it would be hard to imagine not bringing them home, either laughing with you or in a more solemn manner. And that's but that's something that we all think of, that something we all know we would have to face. And that's a real powerful thing to think about. Okay, go ahead, David.
Hey, Chuck. Thank you so much. You're my number one go-to. Anytime I want to find out what's going on, you're fantastic. I really appreciate you.
Thank you,
And
sir.
just kind of a real quick questions, not to take too much of your time. Just historically, how would you put this conflict? Maybe we can get a little flavor of the direction that it might go. Obviously, there's some World War II connotations, but if you could put it in a historical perspective. And then following that last question, what is keeping them, the Russians, firing back in contact? I mean, it seems as though something is keeping them. I don't know if it's a barrel of a gun or what, or how do we get rid of it? And third, why are we not taking Russian land just to create a positional apex or, you know, some counterweight that we could lean on?
Good questions. I kind of answering them in reverse order. Russia, believe it or not, having come in and tried to gobble up a third of Ukraine, they're not going to tolerate any encroachments on their own territory. I think Washington's made it clear to Ukraine that Washington is in it as far as establishing the status quo antebellum, which is putting Russia back to where it was before 2014 and it started the invasions. And as much sense as it would make to offset any Russian gains by striking into Russia itself, I don't think that's in the cards. I think that Washington and Kyiv are united in this. What they want is Ukraine back the way it was before Putin started to redraw the map. Regarding how do you get the other guy's army to stop fighting? You know, that's a really complex equation. It used to go into what was called psychological warfare, which is now essentially information warfare. You never want to underestimate your enemy. Everything I just said about Ukrainian forces pulling together, you go on the other side of the contact line. It's absolutely inevitable in human conduct, and especially the conduct of warfare. If you stress a group of people, they pull together. They will always do that. We talked about the Ukrainians basically coming in and at some point deciding that fighting for their brothers and sisters beside them, that's the most important thing to them. That happens on the other side as well. The Russians that are still fighting in this, and there are a considerable number of professional soldiers that they have who are at least still answering the bell and following orders from above and doing what they are told. Those people who are still in the game there, they've experienced that same level of stress. They've made the perfectly predictable human decision to pull together of, you know, with their battle buddies, with their squad mates, with their guys in their fire team. In order to, I don't want to say break their will, but to influence their conduct, there's a lot of things that psychological warfare does. One of the most effective things it can do is you convince the soldier fighting you that it will be a much better and safer decision for him to stop fighting. That you can try to convince him that he's going to lose inevitably. You can try to convince him that this is a foolish war, that he doesn't have any benefit from fighting in it, from winning it. All he can do is lose. Think about your family at home. Think about your wife. Do you think Moscow really cares about you? These are all the things that are used in psychological warfare. Let's call it information war against the opposite side. The Ukrainians have done one really brilliant thing. They've got little websites and text messages and phone numbers you can call to arrange your own surrender. Not surprisingly, they're getting people to call that number. They're getting people to make that decision. Just in the last couple of days, I've seen entire rifle squads surrendering, 10, 15 guys at a time who've come over to the Ukrainian side. Look, if you see 10 or 15 guys together, that tells me that whoever was the sergeant commanding that rifle squad or the lieutenant commanding that section of his platoon, well, he must be out of the picture somehow, right? So do they have to kill that sergeant? Do they have to kill that officer? What did they have to do in order to do that? The other thing that you absolutely must convince that Russian soldier is that he will be treated well if he comes over. Every time I see a picture of a Russian soldier with his head tied up with tape and a bag on his head and being kicked along by some Ukrainian soldier, look, that is not what you want to put on the internet. That isn't it. You want to show a picture of that young soldier with a cup of coffee in front of him and a donut and a cell phone, and you let him call his mom and say, "Mom, I'm okay. I've been captured. Don't worry about me anymore." You make it as easy as possible for that soldier to make that decision that living is going to be better than dying in the mud in Ukraine. Lots of ways you can do that. Propaganda. You make sure that soldier knows that the Russians don't recover their dead. They leave them laying in the fields. You could show him that he's not going to be treated well in the hospital back there. You can show him that nobody cares about him. Those are the way you influence him to make those decisions to quit. And that is always, always, always better than having to kill that guy. Because a disaffected soldier who is flickering, is what they used to say in the Civil War, American Civil War, he's somebody that the rest of the guys in that platoon, they can't count on. And maybe they know it. And he's disaffected, and maybe he's telling everybody. And that negatively affects the morale of that unit. And if the morale is down, so is their combat efficiency. So the Ukrainians have been pretty good at doing that. And again, that's how you win a war.
All right.
Awesome, Chuck. And then historically, how would you equate this to any wars or anything in history you've seen before?
David?
This is the first war of the 21st century, and in a lot of ways, World War I started out with cavalry charges. It ended with fighter planes, strategic bombing, machine guns, gas. At the beginning, as the clouds were gathering for World War II, we had an episode, the Spanish Civil War, and in the Spanish Civil War, we saw all these new things that we'd never seen before. We saw the close integration of aviation, close air support with infantry. We saw the use of armored warfare, the integration of armor into infantry battle. We saw propaganda used as we'd never seen it before. I think that as the long and difficult road of the 21st century unwinds in front of us, they're going to look at the Ukraine war and they're going to think of it just as the Spanish Civil War was to World War II. We're seeing new things that we hadn't seen on the battlefield before. It used to be only a SEAL platoon got an individual UAV circling over its head. Now, I don't think there's a rifle squad in the Ukrainian army that doesn't have a drone. The Russians have discovered that if you don't have a drone, you're in big trouble. The Russians are discovering, I saw a video today of a Russian soldier pointing this gee whiz Buck Rogers, this is my anti-drone gun, up at a Ukrainian UAV. And guess what? His drone gun was a great looking piece of plastic, but I watched the film of that UAV dropping a mortar shell on him and killing him. Just 10 years ago, nobody thought about rifle squads needing a UAV. That's completely changed. At the start of this war, I think a lot of people thought, and rightly, to consider this, that Russian Soviet-style armored division, tanks at the front, mechanized infantry in the rear, were going to crush the Ukrainian forces in front of them and sweep into Kyiv, and we didn't see that. That didn't happen because the Ukrainians adroitly pivoted to asymmetrical warfare. They didn't try to fight the Russian armored divisions armor on armor. They sent small units in and adjusted their logistics and attacked their command centers. That was important. The Russians still have 10 times the air force that the Ukrainians have, but their frontal aviation has been blunted because not only does every Ukrainian rifle squad have a drone, it also has an Ingla or Stinger missile. So if you try to attack it with rotary aircraft, attack helicopters, or fixed wing aircraft, you're probably going to be catching a Stinger in your cockpit and you're probably going to be walking home. The Russians still have enough tanks to put together a big armored thrust, but 20% of the world's Javelin missiles are in eastern Ukraine. And we've seen the cope cages. You've all seen the flying turrets. Because of mistakes in Russian tank design, they don't have the resiliency of a Western tank. And it's hard to get your Russian crew to go forward in his tank when he knows there's an NLAW behind every bush. There's a Javelin behind every bush. There's a Hellfire missile. There's a Starstreak. That stuff's out there. And again, we've seen that adjustment on the battlefield. 38% of their vehicles are abandoned intact. People who take that, get their orders, Russians jump in their tank, drive it over the first hill, and guess what? They leave all the engine running, the hatches open, and they walk home because they don't want to be incinerated. So those are the changes I see, and I think this is going to be looked back on. There's going to be more wars in the 21st century. I hate to tell you folks, but this is the first war of the 21st century, and the Gulf War was the first war of the cable news networks, and this is the first war of social media.
All right, Chuck, I know I kept you long, and I just want to say thank you for your evening. Folks,
thank you, brother.
Folks, I want you guys to give Chuck a big hand. Squadron leader of SEAL Team 6. He comes in, graces us with his presence and knowledge quite often. And if you didn't get a chance to talk to him tonight, speak to him, ask him a question tonight. He comes back often. Just when you see it, you can give it a shot. But Chuck, I do want to say thank you for promoting the space. We see it. We appreciate it. We're glad to have you here. And you're part of the family. So just thanks, and Godspeed to you as you go on with the rest of your night.
Thank you, Daryl. It's always great talking to you, my brother. And you take it over. You got it. Thanks, everybody. Good night. I'll be back soon. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. All right. That's said and done. Michelle, I didn't get to say good evening to you at the beginning of all of this. I'm glad to have you here.
Hey, Daryl. I'm glad to be here as well. I caught the last 45 minutes of Chuck being here, and it was great. And as usual, he always just puts things into perspective. So I love hearing him talk. It was amazing as usual.
Yeah, always. He's one of these people that you just sit there at the edge of your seat and you're like, what is he gonna say tonight? That you grasp hold of it and you just let it marinate like something like a nice steak, and it becomes something that fills the night with uh, just goodness and knowledge, of course, with every word. So always glad to have you, Chuck. Always. So, Michelle, what's next?
Daryl. So we have such a great night. We just had Chuck for the last, I'm not even sure, maybe the last few hours. And we have language learner joining us in about 45 minutes. So at 7 p.m. Pacific time, 10 p.m. Eastern time. So if everyone could please retweet the Twitter space and let others know that language learner will be joining us tonight. I know last night he was tied up and so couldn't make it. And if you would like to come up and speak, press the microphone button, which is on the bottom left-hand corner. And I know I've mentioned this a few times. There have been quite a few new speakers coming up. So we do go in somewhat of an order with hands up. In the middle of the bottom part of the screen, there is a heart icon. Press on that for a few seconds. And on the right-hand side, there will be a hand up sign. So that's kind of how we do things here. I also wanted to let everybody know that MriyaReport is on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And when you do get the opportunity, please check out MriyaAid.org and see some of the wonderful things that they're doing. 100% of their proceeds go to providing non-lethal aid to Ukraine. And those include things like tourniquets, drones, night vision, and so on. And especially nowadays when transparency is so important, none of the proceeds go to either overhead or administrative costs, which I know a lot of us feel is very important. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And I think we'll take some hands. I have Abdullah, who's next.
Thank you, Michelle. Some of the questions I had, Chuck already answered, but if I may ask, if anyone knows about the Dnipro River. I saw that river in person with my dad when I was young during a trip to Russia and Ukraine. During peaceful times, and that river is not small. And I was going to ask Chuck, one of the questions I had for Chuck was, if this river, I know it can freeze over sometimes. What effects can this have on the battlefield during a winter battle? Thank you.
From what I've understood about the rivers, they're not able to really support like heavy equipment. If that's what you were thinking of, the light, maybe trucks possibly, but I'm not sure how hard that freezes on that lake or that river, because with moving water, it may be frozen over, but you have to have extreme temperatures for it to freeze solid enough to support heavy weights. So if you're thinking about there being massive troop movements and mechanized vehicles, I'm not sure that that's what's going to happen with that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Daryl. If I ask you a quick question about American politics, I know I heard that the election should be next month, right, for Congress. If the other party the opposition were to take over, I know they're more hawkish against the Russians. will that mean more support for Ukraine? How will that affect the calculation of the U.S. president? Thank you.
Right now, we would still have a divide. What we would end up having is a divided government, so to speak. It could be the House, possibly the Senate. One of them may flip, not possibly not both, but you would still have Biden in the presidency, and his support is unwavering. And the Republicans, for the most part, have also um, they have also indicated their support. So you won't see the upheaval that you would think of when it comes to our domestic policies. Um, on this case, you would see the same you would see pretty much the same unification you see right now, with both parties actually voting in favor of aid to Ukraine. So I don't expect much. You're going to see some posturing right now because it's in the last days. Pardon me. You're going to see some posturing as it's been in the last days from certain characters. There's a Republican in Tennessee who's like not he's not for Ukraine and the aid for Ukraine, and he may not win. Although there would be a good reason for him to, but I don't think he'll win just because he's not of the same ilk as his as the rest of the party and where they are on Ukraine. So you'll have outliers on both sides, but it's not going to go anywhere. You may see even more hawkish people come into play, but I wouldn't see a return to the big divide that you saw before.
Thank you so much, Daryl. Thank you.
Let's go, Bubbles. Go for it.
Thank you so much, Daryl and Michelle, for co-hosting this space. It's certainly interesting. I was hoping to step away from the past questions just to, I guess, do some additional housekeeping. Because yesterday it was quite the topic for the co-hosts, such as Dermot and Axel, amongst others, to sort of address, how do we get out, the message of what this space is trying to promote, the awareness it's trying to present to the war in Ukraine. And I believe that they sort of indicated that they weren't too sure about the technical reasons as to why MriyaReport. I mean, there are, I guess, legitimate reasons when this space certainly started with like 8,000 people per day or more, and it's now averaging around about 1,000. I think they expressed they wanted to know, like, what are some of the things they could do to increase that, other than syndication. But I think I didn't get an opportunity to speak then, but I'll hopefully speak now so you get an indication, because this is not the only on-demand chat platform that's being used to discuss the war in Ukraine. I believe Clubhouse, if anybody's familiar with that, also has hundreds of people per day sort of having a similar platform where they can come up on stage and talk. But to this space's credit, you do have professionals, you are recording it, you are putting it on like Spotify. You've got people like Language Learner who've picked up on this, and obviously he'll be here soon to talk his piece. So what I was going to say is you just need to understand with this particular platform, unlike Clubhouse, it does get promoted up by two different things. One, as you may be aware, people retweeting this space certainly increases exposure to this particular space. But two, another component that people may not realize, because it's such a somber topic, that Twitter Spaces actually has an algorithm that ranks up the Twitter space depending on how often emojis are used. So as in this heart symbol when someone provides some kind of reflection or response. I think we all forget, and it's actually, sometimes I've seen co-hosts try to get people to stop doing those reactions because it may be a very somber topic, but it goes against the algorithm that we're within with Twitter Spaces. So just if you could pass on the awareness that if you're willing to increase the engagement with this tool, this space, you have to follow their algorithmic rules, and just encourage people that if they are enjoying what they're listening to use use the reaction emojis, because what that will do is it will allow, I guess, other people to see this space when they're on Twitter, because there's millions of people on Twitter that may be missing out, because I think this space is sort of choking itself out and reducing its opportunity for maximizing things like that to benefit that algorithm. But that's all I had to say. Otherwise, I'm a keen listener. I'll drop back down to the audience to listen to what we have today. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Bubbles. And just as a note, on here we really do not dissuade people from using the emoticons. Um, I think the only time that something may come up about it if somebody's maybe laughing at something when we are in a serious convo, and typically that's like from your troll types, people that really want to just disrupt. But for the most part, if people hear something positive, if they hear something that just gets to them, it doesn't bother us. That just means we know you're listening. We know you're engaged with us. And so we appreciate it. It lets us know that what we're saying and what we are getting across in the information and with the interviews and the people that we bring on, it just means that you like it and we're doing something right. And if we're doing something right by you, that means that you are listening and that engagement can reach out and touch. Um, and hopefully, people, when they hear this and know that we are here because we are supporting Ukrainians, not only by putting out the information, but also trying to get the Mira aid, um, getting funds to them to get other things. Um, Also, too, just know that there are other means we are communicating. Um, Jerry, one of our uh, listeners, he has a radio station out in the Midwest, and he takes this program and he blasts it on his radio channel. So we are reaching people in the far west, the Midwest of at least of America here. So we are, and then we have other projects. You guys saw the short video that we put out. There are other things like that coming. So there we are reaching out and we are expanding. And there's other things in the works. Um, so just be looking out. And just remember, this is all volunteer. Um, None of us are getting paid. There's no parties, no t-shirts, none of that. Everything we and all of the co-hosts and the backroom guys, um, everything is above board, and it is being done just because we believe in what we're doing, and that's why we appreciate you guys, all of you, at no audience, being here, uh, because without you, what we're doing means very little. And if what we're doing means very little, that means that the troops and everybody else are not getting what they need because the aid is not getting to them. So I appreciate your comment and I appreciate your info on the emoticons. And that's I just want to say thanks.
Actually, Daryl, I
So
just wanted to, you brought up a really good point around some of the different things that MriyaReport's doing. And so I wanted to also remind everybody that on October 12th, so that was a few days ago now, MriyaReport dropped James Vasquez video. And there's been over 250,000 views so far, which is incredible. And his videos just, it's really touching, and it's also in memory of his buddy Victor. And so if anyone hasn't had the opportunity to check it out, it is pinned to the MriyaReport Twitter site. So I'd go check it out and see what James has to say. Oh, and it is on Spotify as well, so you can check it out there.
and that what you saw in that preview, that was just a preview. There is more of it coming, of that interview that we had with So just be looking out for these things. They're going to be, coming out, and hopefully we give you something else to take with you. All right. Let's go. Let's see. I got Remy. She came in, and then I'm gonna go Prince, and then lunchtime.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for those people who've organized this Twitter space. I've been an avid listener for quite a few weeks now, and it's always interesting to listen to your presenters and your interveners. So I have a question. I'm not sure who could take it, but it relates to Iran's increasing involvement in this war. We know that it is supplying Russia with drones. They've been doing swarm attacks on a number of cities and civilian targets. Also talk that ballistic missiles and cruise missiles might be provided to Russia. And also I've seen several sources now claiming that the Iranis have people on the ground providing technical support to the Russians. And I wonder, how is it that that is happening without a response? It's unprecedented that Iran is involved so directly in a war in the West and in Europe. Why haven't we seen the US or NATO intervene or take some decisive steps to interdict Iran's participation in this conflict? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know, Daryl, could you take that? Oh, actually, we might have Colby coming up right now. Hold on, Duzex. Colby, are you able to take that one?
Mic check.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. NATO is a defensive alliance, and Iran, you can make the case that through the presence of military advisors on the ground in Ukraine, that they are now a active combatant in this war. Although certainly during the Cold War, when the United States and the USSR were sending military advisors around the world, and in many cases actually engaging each other, that was not viewed as an active war. So I don't believe that we're going to see a NATO response to Iranian involvement in Ukraine. Not going to happen. There needs to be a response, and I certainly believe and hope there will be a strong response being formulated. Today, it was reported that United Kingdom Secretary of Defense Ben Wallace was traveling to Washington for a emergency meeting of sorts. And just a while ago now, the Pentagon released the readout from really learning too much from what they're saying. I'll put it in the nest for those that want to read it. But just the fact that he actually flew all the way to Washington to meet with United States Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, I think says a lot rather than just having a phone call. He actually went and met in person, and it was reported by the media that Iran would be a topic of discussion. Iran isn't specifically mentioned in the readout. It's it was more focused around just general United Kingdom defense cooperation, and Ukraine included. But the media did report that Iran was a topic of discussion. I suspect that the reporting from, is it Deborah Hayes or Hames, I believe, at Sky, if I recall correctly, her reporting about British fighter pilots training Chinese pilots, that's probably a topic of discussion as well. So I believe that the United States and the United Kingdom and other countries are currently formulating a response to what Iran is doing. There is a hardening of resolve in Europe towards Iran on abandoning the disastrous JCPOA agreement and a hardening on sanctions. And Europe, for a very long time, has been rather soft on Iran when it comes to sanctions. The United States has had fairly significant sanctions against Iran for some time, but Europe has been far behind on that. So I suspect we might see some more action on that front. And certainly there's more that the United States can do on sanctions against Iran as well, because there's many loopholes that continue to be exploited when it comes to sanctions, not only in Iran, but Russia itself and other malign actors around the world. So that's something to look at. But as far as a military response, I don't anticipate this happening. That's highly unlikely in my view. I don't believe that the United States or any other country is going to declare war on Iran because Iran sends arms to Russia. Even for myself, who is I'm extremely hawkish on Iranian issues, and I don't support the United States going to war with Iran over the sale of arms. That would be beyond. I mean, if Congress wants to declare war, that's their prerogative, but the United States Congress is not going to declare war. And this would be a very vast abuse of presidential authority if President Biden decided that he wanted to execute military strikes on Iran on this basis, because unless there's some further evidence that something is afoot that is of grave concern to the United States and threatens the national security of the United States, military action against Iran is unjustified at this point in time.
Yeah, just those are really good comments and very informative. I guess the one piece that I feel changes the situation on the ground is that the Iranians are reported to be providing support on the ground to the Russians who are encountering technical issues with some of this equipment. And to me, it's kind of ups the ante, and it's more than just sanctions. I don't know. I'm not an expert in this field by any means, but I find that surprising that it's going on unanswered.
Well, we need to allow for a little bit of time to a response to be formulated. So I wouldn't say it's going unanswered at this point in time. If a week later we still haven't seen a change in posture, then I would start ringing alarm bells, and I'd be very concerned about the appeasement factions within the United States and Europe winning out on this question. So if in a week's time there hasn't been an escalation in response, we have a problem. But right now, they need a little bit of time to make a decision about what route they want to go.
Yeah, I also like your comment about how the Europeans have been generally soft on this topic and sanctions in general. So any gesture that they would take at this point, I mean, it is European soil, and hopefully they'll respond in kind.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, the Iranian regime has been engaging in terrorism on European soil for some time, and that hasn't really hardened much resolve. It hasn't really determined them to cease, attempting to cooperate with the Iranian regime. But hopefully, this will be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Thanks for your time tonight, folks. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Daryl.
Oh no, I was just going to say thank you.
We were thinking the same thing. Go ahead, Prince.
Colby points out one of the biggest things that I've learned through this entire last 8+ months or so is patience. Things don't seem to move as quickly as my mind wants them to, as far as progress on the battlefield, progress in the politics of the entire thing. And if Colby didn't pop right up here, my response to that would have been a little bit of patience. I think response is being formulated. I would not have said it as eloquently as Colby did, so thank you, Colby, for jumping up. But I think the whole heart of it is a little bit of patience to let people decide exactly what is the appropriate response is right on target. So anyway, I came up to sort of give you a little bit of support there, Daryl, as far as as far as when somebody asked a little bit about the current political situation in the United States and the upcoming elections. And, I don't know for sure, Daryl, but I think you and I have similar views politically. But I have to say that something along these lines came up earlier today, and I sent Axel a message, and it was regarding a senator that I really have not liked for a long, long time. And I sent him a message and said, "Damn you for making me like Lindsey Graham a little bit," because the answer is right there, for me at least. The the political will of the United States Congress, the congressmen and women and the senators, though on the far edges of each party are very divided, there is a very good and very solid center. If anybody tried to rip support for Ukraine, Lindsey Graham would go postal on them. And there are senators on the Democratic side who would do the same, because the reality is these are senators and Congress people who will still be serving and who have supported Ukraine for many, many years and very wholeheartedly. And so I have absolutely no fear at all that the election, no matter who wins the House, who wins the Senate, I have no doubt at all that the support for Ukraine will be just as strong as it is now. And it is very strong, and it is very united. And it's very nice to see our government being united on something like this for a change. And then just because I'm up here, just real quick, I'm not going to go on a ramble like I did last time, Daryl, I promise.
Go
But
ahead and plug it. Go ahead and plug it. Go for it.
I'm going to plug it, Daryl. I'm going to plug it. If you look second tweet in the nest, Alexandra Drick from Ukraine. She has formerly been an advisor to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense in 2019 and 2020. She is currently international advocate in the Center for Civil Liberties of Ukraine. She's speaking tomorrow on the MriyaReport, 8 a.m. Pacific. I'm setting an alarm because that's a little early for me. 11 a.m. Eastern, 1500 UTC, 1600 London, 1700 Prague, 1800 Kiev. I'm so excited about this, and it sounds weird to be excited because of her subject matter. I ran across her in September when I was watching a United Nations Security Council meeting, I believe, and she gave testimony. And the testimony she gave was about the treatment of Ukrainians in filtration camps as they're going into Russia, and the treatment of Ukrainian POWs by the Russians. Just 12 minutes of her testimony made me say she's got to come on the space. So I have it pinned in my profile there. If you want to go and look, you can find the YouTube video there. I encourage you to take 12 minutes or so out of your day and watch that before she comes on tomorrow. It's not going to be, I'm sure it probably won't be totally 100% easy subject, but I think it's an important subject for us to hear about. And she has a lot of great information that she can share with us about firsthand experiences that she's heard and been able to share with the United Nations. And if you check out her profile, you can see some of the things she's done. She was at the United Nations General Assembly and has gotten a little bit of coverage through the AP. But yeah, it's just, I think she's going to be a fabulous guest, and I'm so excited that she's been able to join us. And I'm going to, on the last thing, say thank you again, Victoria. And I will say that every time I mention this, Thank you, Victoria, for making that connection and getting her on the space. So I will stop with my plugging it for now, but don't be surprised if I plug it after Language Learner or a little bit later or just before I go to bed tonight, because I'm really really happy to be having her on as a guest, and yeah, and yeah, I think it's going to be a really good time. The way those military people got excited about Thomas Steiner is the way I'm excited about her to be on. So, thank you guys.
All right, thanks, Princess. All right. Well, let's see. Good evening, lunchtime. Puddin', you guys are next. Be easy on
Hi,
me.
Daryl. Okay, so
At
I
lunchtime.
actually had it. Say that again. Oh, hey,
I said,
how you
hey.
doing?
All right.
You're all right.
And so why oat milk? Why not goat milk?
With oat milk because, well, I read on Reddit some time ago that a guy had a dream that one day he woke up and everyone on Twitter after their handle had the type of, like, basically how they had their coffee after their handle. So I like my coffee with oat milk, therefore oat milk.
So I got to put goat milk behind mine?
If that's what you put in your coffee, yeah, totally.
You put goat milk in your coffee?
I love goat milk. I'm one of those folks that can't do, regular milk. So goat milk works for me. Anyway, go ahead, lunchtime.
Fair enough. Thanks. I actually had a question for Bubbles, but I guess he's gone, right? I had never heard of Clubhouse before, so I had a bit of a Google, and I wondered, I had a couple of things, right? So, first of all, is it possible to do this on Twitter and Clubhouse at the same time in some way, i.e., have it sort of simultaneously broadcast on the two platforms? Is that possible? A. B, he's talked about emojis and the use of emojis as an indicator to the Twitter algorithm that the space has high engagement. Well, in that, as that's the case, a small source of frustration for me sometimes with MriyaReport is that it's quite hard to it's quite hard. Like, for example, I was listening, I wanted to ask Bubbles a question, so I requested speaker, I got speaker, and I got it really quickly, which is because it's not so busy, but there was no way for me to just ask him a question. Do you know what I mean? I had to sort of wait for him to say his piece, then the next speaker, then the next speaker, then the hosts to talk a bit or whatever. And by the time I got on, the previous speaker is long gone and isn't on the panel anymore. So perhaps we could use the emojis as a way to say, this particular speaker has something relevant to say to the current discussion. And I believe that would have the benefit of having more coherent discussions, because what tends to happen now is that you start a topic, the speaker goes away, a new topic comes up, then someone comes in and has another one, and then you go back to the first topic. Do you see what I mean? It gets a bit fragmented. So I wonder if emojis would help.
Well, there is actually lunchtime. Down there where you see that when you punch up the little heart and you see the one emoji with the little brackets around it. If you are currently in the speakers panel and we see that, typically we'll bring you because undoubtedly you have something to add to um, that particular thread, and that helps sometimes. Now, I'm not going to say it works 100% of the time because if we got a lot of people um, and everybody's really on the same topic, that's exactly and that's where we will.
Do you mean this?
It'll get long in that sense. Huh? Say again?
Do you mean this emoji?
Yeah.
A hand wave? Yeah, I did that. But I don't know. Is that an official thing? Is that what we do now?
Well, sometimes. I mean, it depends on who's up. If I saw it, if I would have seen it, I would have brought you on in.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I will recognize that. That's
So I would. So my recommendation, in light of what Bubbles said, is to replace that with the heart emoji because clearly Twitter prefers that in terms of engagement, right?
no, I think it's any of the emojis. Because I don't know if it can decipher which ones get the most. I think it's the fact that it's people are interacting.
Okay, I see. I see.
But if he
Okay,
comes
cool,
back,
great.
but if he comes back up, Bubbles, if you're out there, come back up and let's talk about it for a second. So yeah, if that's the case, I thought he meant any emoji, but if he meant um, just certain ones, then okay, it is what it is. But I thought he meant any of the emojis because it just means that people are interacting with the space.
Yeah, I think you might be right. Maybe I got slightly the wrong end of the stick there, but yeah, I think that's the sort of thing that would. Because I'll tell you what, Daryl, like I don't see MriyaReport on my list of recommended spaces, and I'm on it all the time, and
And
I
that
don't see it on.
and that's something
And
that I really have a problem with because sometimes I don't want to see all these other spaces. I want to see my favorite space or my most visited spaces. If that's if you visit
Yeah.
more than one, that's what I would like to see. I don't want to see all new spaces. That's not
The
for
so
most people. I
the
don't
only
know if
thing
that's
I
it.
see. Sorry. So the only thing I see actually for MriyaReport is a roundup, like a sort of occasionally I will see like, do you want to catch up on a previous recording? But I never see it as a recommendation. And in fact, for a while, it didn't even appear at the top of my Twitter app as, like, do you know what I mean by that? At the top, you get like active spaces going on at the time. And for a while, it disappeared from there too. So, yeah, something funny is going on with Twitter. I mean, it's a real shame that the audience for this space is not a lot higher because, to my mind, I've listened to I think I've given every Ukraine space a go pretty much, and this is definitely the best one. Like the quality of speakers and so on, it's unparalleled. So it really is a shame that it doesn't have a wider audience. And yeah, anyway, there we are. That's all I needed to say. I'm gonna drop down to listener. Thanks so much, Daryl. Thanks, Michelle. Bye.
Hey, appreciate it. Lunchtime, appreciate it. Putin. Good evening.
Hi. I'm in California, and I just wanted to say I teach high school students, well, students who've returned to high school to get their diplomas. And I'm always trying to engage them in history. And today I showed them that James Vasquez video, and it was amazing. They were just came alive. We're studying the Civil War, but then I was comparing things he was saying and things going on in Ukraine to the stuff we were studying about in the American Civil War. And boy, that was, I just want to say that was a great teaching tool. And so when more of that comes out, I'll use it in my curriculum.
Well, we appreciate that. We appreciate it. We've had teachers on here before, and I always want to say thank you for you guys listening, because everything that's happening today, just like any other day, but the things that are happening today will be what is written about in history books. And
Absolutely.
I'm not just talking about our space. I'm talking about the war, the reactions to people, to the governments around the world. We read about World War II, we read about Korea, Vietnam, and for the next generation, we are in these moments, and it's how we react is what people will be reading about. And I appreciate all the teachers that come in here because you are the ones that are talking to the minds of the future. And you are spreading this to them, and you are interpreting this world to them. And I just want to say thanks. Um, appreciate everything you guys do.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I tell them they can do a current event for U.S. history about Ukraine, and I said, so why would Ukraine be part of U.S. history? And it's just what you said, because the U.S. is very involved, and then James, of course, is from the United States, and we talked about why that would be so important that he goes over there. And it was, yeah, it's just he's such a good role model, and it was a great situation. So I want to thank everybody who made that happen.
They are listening and they appreciate it. When we see the engagement in the video, when we talk to James and tell him about how it's doing, and he understands the impact of it, because it helps his cause as well. So, and we're all united in this thing. So, appreciate that, and we'll let him know. He'll be on here. Not too many days. He'll be back on here, and hopefully you'll come up and you'll speak to him yourself, and you can thank him yourself. All right, Abdullah.
Thank you, Daryl. Thanks again. If I may ask Kobe, if he's still here, he was talking about the JCPOA. Kobe, I wanted to ask you, are the Iranians trying to torpedo a disastrous deal for the West and a great deal for them by getting into the Russian quagmire? What's going on in Tehran, Kobe?
He's not here at the moment, but when we see him, we'll bring him back. If you can hold your question for him, when he comes back, we'll talk. We can talk about it.
I'm here.
Thanks.
Oh, you here? There you go.
Did you hear my question, Kobe?
Yeah, I heard it. I think that after the deal was left by the United States and with the previous administration, they kind of assumed that it was gone, and then Biden signaled his interest in re-entering the deal and renegotiating it, and it seems that they were hoping to really get some more out of the deal should they pretend to re-enter it. But negotiations weren't going too well, and now with the crackdown, I don't think that they're wasting their energy trying to convince the United States to come back to it, because at this point it's completely politically untenable for the Biden administration to re-enter that agreement with Iran, with what's going on between the repression of the Iranian people that's is constant, but certainly especially brutal with the current protests that are happening there, and now with them arming Russia in their genocide in Ukraine. There's no way that President Biden can convince Congress and the American public that it's in America's interest to re-enter into the JCPOA with Iran. So the regime there is, they're not going to waste their time trying to get back into it. And they've obviously determined that they have something to gain from supplying Russia with these arms. I won't purport to know what it is they think that they're going to get out of this arrangement, but Russia clearly has something that they want. They're not going to just give these weapons away for free. That much is certain.
Maybe to kind of jump in there while we have a little bit of a lull. The Iranian government is in a fairly tough spot. They've actually deployed, at least in the last 24 hours, a number of fairly experienced combat units that were already being seen in Iranian Revolutionary Guard groups in Syria into Tehran, as well as a couple other locations around the country. the general sense, talking with Iranians both in Iran and abroad, is that the regime is still desperately trying to find something to clutch to, either as a way to suppress the protests or a way to get more resources, as they have apparently been unable to decisively suppress the protest now. If I was a betting man, I'd say that the regime is trying to get as much economic support as it can from its limited allies currently, and that's part of the reason why it's moving additional missiles and other infrastructure into Russian control. Although with all this action, and I think an Iranian actually who was in Iran said it very well in another space, said America and the West, they don't really care about the Iranians, killing, the Iranian government killing Iranians. That's happened before, but it's very difficult to ignore Iranian munitions on camera killing Ukrainians on Ukrainian soil. He seems to have been somewhat right, unfortunately, because we are seeing more responses from a number of EU states about increasing sanctions on Iran since that footage came out yesterday.
Language very quick. Are there regular Iranian army units that have been deployed, or are you just referring to IRGC formations?
IRGC. It's the Siberian forces. These are like I don't want to call them special forces, but broadly speaking, special forces. And they've been used in Syria for a while. And there's allegations that they're now on the streets of Tehran. Per the New York Times.
Yeah, I won't ask you to detail this further because it's not germane. But if you don't mind, if you have any specific intelligence about what specific units are being deployed, if you want to DM me, I'd be very interested in seeing that information.
Sure. Yeah, I'll try and get that over to you. Shoot me a DM and I'll get it over to you once I'm done with the update. But
thanks, buddy.
Hey, thank you, brother. With that, I've got the map and text up at the top of the screen. If you guys would like to follow along, for those of us just joining, welcome. We have a live map update. It's free, it doesn't cost you anything on Apple and Android. You simply click on it and it'll let you take a look at where I'm currently looking on a map. We'll be using a map from Andrew Perpetua tonight. So there's a number of icons on it. You can click on them for more information. Without any further ado, we can jump right into it if that works for everyone. Okay, I'll take that as a yes then, I guess, unless I'm possibly not hearing people.
Yeah,
No.
they got you. They got you.
All right, thanks, brother. Without further ado, and this one will be for both last 48 hours. So this is the military update for October 17th and October 18th, 2022, day 236 to 237 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. In Western Ukraine, and really Belarus, we should start with, the Russian Federation has announced they'll deploy about 170 tanks, up to 200 armored vehicles, and up to 100 artillery systems to Belarus as part of their estimated 9,000 strong force in the country as part of, quote, joint drills between the two nations. Additional long-range Russian aircraft, specifically the MiG-31, a very fast aircraft that can also capable of conducting longer-range missile strikes, have arrived in Belarus with an unknown complement of ammo. There is increased concern of both further suicide drone strikes as well as missile strikes from Belarusian territory into areas in Western Ukraine, such as Kyiv, Zhytomyr, etc. Speaking of, moving to Kyiv and talking about the events of the last couple of days, as well as some of the politics of the region. Missile and suicide drone attacks have continued into Kyiv over the last 2 days, targeting electrical infrastructure and damaging a power plant, as well as water supply systems. There were several deaths, and power is continuing to be worked on in terms of restoration overnight. Overall, the Shahed 136 suicide drones packs approximately as much explosive power as 3 artillery shells apiece, as evidenced by videos of powerful explosions. Additional strikes were carried out in Western Ukraine as well. Russia has carried out a total of 190 strikes on infrastructure and residential areas within the last 11 days, killing some 70 people and wounding an additional 240. Russian strategic bombers have also begun firing missiles from closer to Kyiv in Russia's Rostov region, located immediately to the east of Ukraine, rather than firing them from the Caspian Sea, which has reduced the time to shelter or intercept to as low as 40 minutes, about a reduction of 50% from what we were seeing before. The Ukrainian Prime Minister urged Ukrainians to save as much energy as possible given the current damage to the power grid, with some 30% of Ukrainian energy infrastructure being targeted, with restrictions from 5 to 11 p.m. to prevent overloading of the grid. This is broadly saying don't run washing machines, air conditioners, heaters, if at all possible. It is unclear how long these recommendations will last. In some of the recently deoccupied territories, there's been statements made that if power gain or power draw is too much, there will be mandatory rolling blackouts. Ukraine has managed to release 108 female soldiers and members of their armed forces as a result of another prisoner swap yesterday between Ukraine and Russia. A number of them were naval personnel who were in Mariupol. Per Ukrainian intelligence, Russia has ordered some 1,750 Iranian drones of various types, but has not received all of them currently. Reportedly, Ukraine has an interception rate of about 70% for these suicide drones. Additionally, the supply of Russia's Iskander ground-based ballistic missiles is critically low and may be part of the reason why Russia is seeking ballistic missiles on loan from Iran. As a result of all of this, Ukraine is actively discussing severing diplomatic ties with Iran due to their participation in the war. Zelensky fired the Ukrainian ambassador to Kazakhstan, who had ended up in hot water after quoting a deceased Ukrainian soldier in, quote, "The more Russians we kill now, the fewer our children have to kill," which had caused a political storm in Kazakhstan and emboldened some Russian propaganda outlets. The Ukrainian government has stated today, from their intelligence services, that they expect the war to end by summer of 2023, with the liberation of all Ukrainian territory, including Crimea, and essentially grave damage politically, economically, and physically to the Russian state. A bust of Russian poet Denis Pushkin was broken and toppled over in Kyiv at the capital university, and the fact that the individual responsible is being charged by police on request of the university for hooliganism has sparked some backlash, asking if this is really the hill they want to die on. Moving to the Sumy, Chernihiv, and Kharkiv regions broadly to the northeast. Strikes have continued across the border region into Ukraine without noticeable change, while several communities were left without power, and unfortunately, there were a number of fatalities today. In information that just came out in a documentary today, Russian troops had actually taken the time when they were in control of this area to make their headquarters in a school in Chernihiv, and then forced some 350 people into the school's basement as a human shield against any Ukrainian strikes. 10 people died of various conditions, be it starvation, sickness, etc., and 7 were shot, with bodies sometimes left to rot. A documentary about this emerged today. It's rather harrowing if you choose to watch it, though it is important to recognize. Russian troops attempted a cross-border attack to a small suburb to the northwest of Vovchansk, itself located to the northeast of Kharkiv, and they were repelled. This is one of very few attempts by Russia to recontest the region physically that they retreated from several weeks ago. Russia continues to fire rockets into Kharkiv, this time heavily damaging a humanitarian goods warehouse. Moving further to the east, to the Kupiansk and eastern Kharkiv regions broadly, Ukrainian troops continue to push east from Kupiansk along the P07 highway and are broadly believed to be continuing to press on Svatove via this route. This is manifesting in Ukrainian assaults towards the Russian strongpoint north of the highway here of Kislivka, where skirmishes continue around Berestov to the south of the highway and positions west of there. There is considerable Russian artillery strikes and also expressed considerable Russian worry about the true quantity of Ukrainian forces that are gathered in this region. Moving down to Liman and Kreminna, Russian forces are broadly launching a counterattack to the west of Kreminna, despite the fact that Ukrainian artillery continues towards Ukrainian positions along the eastern side of the Zarabets River. Russian troops are reportedly skirmishing across the open fields that lie between Kreminna and the river, but have not reportedly taken any of the towns as of yet. The battles are still ongoing. This appears to be an attempt to try and buy space and time to keep Ukrainian forces from further contesting the highway between Svatove and Kreminna, which they have been doing so with artillery over the last several weeks. Moving down to Seversk and towards Lysychansk, Russian forces attempted offensives towards the northeast and southeast of Seversk in Bilhorivka and Smyrn, but were broadly repelled. Moving down to Bakhmut, fighting continues without notable Russian gain to the east and northeast of Bakhmut city, although artillery strikes continue along the line of contact, and Russian forces continue beating their head into the wall regarding Ukrainian defenses to the east of the city. Russian forces continue to claim that they have seized the towns of Optin and Ivanrad, which are immediately south of the city, but these claims are false. Don't even have to take my word for it or the Ukrainians. Even the Russian Wagner group is explaining that we're not in the city liberating it anytime soon. The Ukrainians are putting up quite a fight. Moving down to Mariupol and the area around it, or rather in Donetsk region, there's been no significant change as Ukrainian and Russian shelling continues. Russia continues to attack to the northwest and west of Donetsk, but nothing has materially changed on the ground as it hasn't for several months. Regarding Mariupol, across the Sea of Azov yesterday, in Yeysk, Russia, a Russian Su-34 fighter jet crashed into a residential building and killed some 14 people, with the pilot successfully ejecting in a rather dramatic photo. This would appear to be Russia's 13th non-combat loss of aircraft in this war. Russians blame an engine fire for the reason. Moving to Zaporizhia and the southern axis, shelling continues on Ukrainian positions around Vuhledar and north of Tokmak, where Ukrainian shelling with NATO artillery systems reportedly devastated a number of Russian artillery batteries in the area over the day. There are reports of Ukrainian forces skirmishing south from Mariupol towards Poloy, as well as southeast of Zaporizhia city in the Melitopol-Tokmak direction. Russian authorities are trying to force Ukrainian museums in the occupied territories to transfer essentially any and all valuable exhibits to Russia proper in short order. This is not the first time it's happened. There's been a couple recorded instances of looting of historical and cultural artifacts, but now they're making it more of an institutional rule. Around Ener Hodar, the nuclear power plant, Russian forces have kidnapped additional members of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, including another assistant general director, as well as the IT director. Their condition, as well as the deputy general director who was kidnapped last week, remains unknown. Moving to Kherson. Across the Kherson front today, the ongoing Ukrainian operation continues, broadly in the form of artillery strikes along the northeastern line of attack and skirmishes lightly to the northwest of Kherson city. There were 3 Russian airstrikes and 15 Ukrainian airstrikes, which along with over 200 artillery strikes eliminated some 82 Russian soldiers, 1 tank, 3 armored vehicles, 2 artillery systems, 3 ammo depots, and a pontoon bridging operation. Ukrainian forces continue to engage in artillery bombardments, airstrikes, and limited ground movements in apparent preparation for a broader offensive towards Berislav along the northeastern line of contact. Russian sabotage and infiltration groups continue to be located and destroyed along these northeastern lines as well, with a couple of them being captured today. Another Russian transport barge across the Dnipro River was targeted and sunk today near the Novokakhovka Dam. The Russian occupation government urged residents to evacuate from Kherson, stating, quote, "The Ukrainian side is gathering forces for a large-scale offensive." They also stated there is a risk of the Kakhovka Dam and bridge being destroyed and leading to large flooding. There's been speculation of Russia attempting to detonate parts of the bridge in order to prevent any Ukrainian advance across it in the event that Russia loses control of it. There is currently a large movement of collaborators from the Berislav area across the dam via either pontoon attempts or, if they can, other methods to get into more Russian-controlled territory. And it was apparently these collaborators outright panicking that kind of motivated the local occupation government to make the statements today. Moving to Odessa, the Black Sea, and Crimea. Reportedly in the Black Sea, there are 2 Russian combat surface vessels with approximately 16 missiles available for use. Drones and missiles were used for an attack on Odessa on the 17th. Per Zelensky, the Iris-T air defense system, widely reported to be in southern Ukraine, has already distinguished itself in operation. It has been confirmed by U.S. defense officials, so now not only reports from partisans and the Ukrainian government, that elements of the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps are in Crimea and reportedly South Kherson to train and instruct Russian forces on the usage of suicide drones. In general, yesterday, Ukrainian forces eliminated some 530 soldiers for a total of 65,850, 850 of those within the last 48 hours, 11 tanks, 14 armored vehicles, 29 artillery systems, 6 of which were rocket artillery, 1 air defense, 26 cars and trucks, and 35 UAVs. Currently, of the 8,000 active Wagner Group soldiers in Ukraine, 4,000 or more are recruited prisoners. EU foreign ministers have now agreed on a military training mission for Ukraine, should train up to 15,000 soldiers on European Union territory, and should start in mid-November. The EU has also stated that they will likely be increasing sanctions on Belarus. ExxonMobil said on Monday that it has left Russia entirely after Putin expropriated its assets following 7 months of negotiations over the transfer of its 30% stake in a major oil project, reportedly to the tune of about $4 billion. Russia reportedly has ceased mobilization activities in some regions. In Moscow specifically, they cut off mobilization activities on the 17th and said that anyone who already hadn't been processed and reported for mobilization, well, now you're totally excused from it, which I would be a little upset if I walked into a recruiting office on the 16th then. This is likely in response to broad complaints about Russia forcibly grabbing men off the streets of the capital and other major cities, which does not play well in Russian domestic media. Russian politicians have submitted a bill that would include all security forces of the Russian Federation, including intelligence, National Guard, military police, as well as regular police, as capable of being directly mobilized into combat actions in Ukraine. The traditional Russian fall conscription cycle begins on November 1st after having been delayed for a month, likely due to logistical difficulties in managing both the mobilization efforts as well as the conscription. Ukraine has urged for increased sanctions on Iran for supplying munitions and weaponry to Russia, and several EU countries are reportedly backing the idea. And across the Kerch Strait Bridge from Crimea to Russia, we are now seeing movement of heavier trucks being allowed across after, frankly, real issues with trying to move them all via a ferry system. However, the checkpoints are incredibly fierce, reportedly taking 8 minutes per every single vehicle to get across through just the checkpoint, let alone driving. With that, I should be about done. Thank you so much for listening. If there's any questions, I'm happy to stick around.
Thank you so much, Language, for that update. And we don't have any hands right now. So if anyone does want to come up and speak, please press the microphone button, which is on the bottom left-hand corner, and Language is here to answer a few questions. I don't know if anyone in the speaker panel that's currently up has a question. Alex or Gaz?
I think I have, sorry. I've got some DMs as well if we're, trying to fill a space.
Sure. Do you want to answer some of your DMs then? And we do have a few people coming up right now, so it might just take a sec. Go ahead, Abdullah.
Thanks again, Language. Thank you for the update. Just wanted to ask you about you said that there were some Iranian trainers in Crimea and Kherson. Is this temporary, or are they actively involved in the fighting?
So this is something that's been reported a couple times. It's actually believed a number of them were attacked and killed in at least 2 separate locations via long-range strikes. One physically in Crimea, the cause of which is unknown. The other that is closer to coastline. This is still on the southern side of the Dnipro River, so it's not physically in contact with Ukrainian forces, but near the small town of Zalizny Port, as well as the main Russian base, or one of the main Russian bases, I should say, of Zankoy, located in northeastern Crimea. What's been alleged is that there are IRGC trainers directly involved in instructing and overseeing Russian launches of these suicide drones, as well as other drone systems. However, it's not like they're necessarily on the front lines right now. There were reports that after a strike on this city closer to Kherson proper and very much within range of Ukrainian artillery systems, that at least 40 Iranian nationals have been killed. At the time, people were referring to them as unnamed Middle Eastern advisors, but the implication being that they were IRGC, and as well as a number of Russians with them. So this is not the first time we're hearing this. I want to say Ukraine came out and said it themselves yesterday, but now we have the US confirming it as well, and partisans in the area have been talking about it for the better part of the month.
Perfect. Thanks, language.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Alex.
Thank you. My question would be if there was any, if you saw anything about recognition of Republic of Ichkeria by Ukrainian Parliament, if there was any coverage to that. Just curious in the sources that you looked through.
I hadn't seen anything of that. Frankly, if you don't mind enlightening me on it, I didn't see any of that pop up. Is this talking about stuff in Europe? I'm blanking on the name of the Russian Kaliningrad, or is this?
No. Ichkeria is name of Chechnya. When Chechnya declared its independence, it got the name of Republic of Ichkeria, and nobody has recognized this. And apparently, Ukrainian Parliament is the first internationally recognized body that has recognized now Republic of Ichkeria. It has retained government, and their government in exile is represented by Ahmed Zakayev. And there was a celebration of this event in, there are two battalions, Chechen battalions in Ukraine fighting by the side of Ukrainians, and basically since 2014. So yeah, it's a big event. Like, it probably doesn't have coverage right now, but going forward, it's gonna be big. This is also, yes, and they also recognized genocide of Chechen nation during two wars. And this is a call for other captive nations in Russia. There are over 80 entities, and they are all different ethnic groups that are not Russians per se. So I think we discussed it a couple of times, actually many times. When we speak about Russia, really we assume that this is one entity, but there are many different nations representing what is left of empire. And yeah, so I think I do not see currently big international coverage for this, but I think there will be repercussions because these declarations are not taken away easily. So basically, Ukrainians responded in kind to annexation of their territories and provinces by Russia.
Yeah, I'll have to take a look. I haven't seen that actually come up in any Ukrainian language media yet. But when it does, thank you for bringing it to my attention.
I can actually, let me find on Telegram channel if I can find it, but yeah, that would be interesting to follow too, because here on Space we discussed a few times Chechens, etc. And I think it will be a big event in their national history. Like they fought Russian colonialism for hundreds of years, literally hundreds of years. So
And then real quick, I did have a typo there. I fat fingered it. It was a bust of Alex Pushkin, not Denis Pushkin. Denis is the first name of the Ukrainian prime minister. I had both topics right next to each other. It's the old poet, not Denis Pushilin, the DPR occupation government head. So there's no reason for that to be sitting in the middle of a university in Kiev. So thank you for the people who did catch me on that.
Okay, go ahead, Craig.
No, I'll just be, I'm interested in Language's thoughts regarding the area around Melitopol, right? If we could just kind of focus in on that, if we were to kind of do the scenario of 1, 2, 3, where Kherson falls, the entire left bank, north bank of the river is in Ukrainian hands, and the Russians are on the right, you would then factor that Melitopol is the next Kherson, right? And so what do we know about Russia moving troops in and around Melitopol? Have we seen anything like that in the past 48 to 72 hours? I try to follow that rail line as much as I can, but I don't catch everything. So I'd be interested in what your thoughts are in regards to that specific area.
It's a real area of concern for Russians. This is one of the few places in Ukraine. They're really broadly northwest southeast axes of 3 defensive lines coming from up near Vaslivka, right along the Dnipro River, going southeast. There's one that goes from Enerhodar southeast, and I believe there's one in the middle that sort of more includes Melitopol. These are defensive fortifications that have been set up somewhat considerably over the last several months. They're not adequately staffed, as last I had seen, so it remains to be seen what kind of impediment those would be. However, there's been increased movement of Ukrainian forces into the south in recent months. There's been increased concern expressed by Russian forces that they could be attacked in such a region. There's not as many natural terrain barriers down here between the front lines and Melitopol. And frankly, at that point, even if Kherson's not captured, it really starts to put into doubt most things along the southern axis, because I'm sure, as you know better than I do, this is the major Russian logistics route now. So we've seen considerable artillery fire. Some Ukrainian artillery crews got their bones today in the form of a number of Russian artillery crews who were just outmatched and outgunned, quite literally in some cases. And as a result, we're starting to see more concerns from Russian forces that this is preparation for an assault. Before, when there was statements made by Russian forces about that, they responded by utilizing large quantities of rocket artillery fire on the suspected Ukrainian staging area, which has had a couple Ukrainian skirmishes out from it, but nothing of note since then. I wouldn't be surprised if they try and go for the same strategy a second time, but unfortunately, you can only do that, really broadly speaking, in one area at a time, either to the west of Zaporizhia, closer to Melitopol, or the east of Zaporizhia, closer towards Mariupol. I don't think you can pull off both if you also still want to keep slamming your head against the wall in Bakhmut, Kherson, and all the other areas. Does that kind of clarify the question?
Sure, sounds good.
Thank you, brother. And it's good to see you, man.
You as well.
Thanks so much, Craig. We'll go to John and then Dryfly.
Thank you, Michelle. Language, wonderful update as per usual. Just want to briefly comment regarding the recognition of the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria. So that has definitively been passed by the Verkhovna Rada. Once it is signed into law by President Zelensky, as far as I can tell, it will serve as Ukraine officially recognizing the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria as a sovereign state. So Ukraine will become the first sovereign state to recognize Chechnya in effect.
Yeah, thank you for that. Go ahead, Dryfly. Oh, actually, I just wanted to see, does anyone have any comments or anything they want to say to John?
Yes, actually. John, is there a Chechen government in exile right now of any sorts?
I believe there is, but I need to find details. It's slightly complicated because they had a government that was, to my understanding, kind of in existence, kind of trying to, lead a resistance movement to Russian occupation up until about 2007, and they basically just declared themselves an Islamic emirate. And so there has been a lot of fracturing and splitting off within the former leadership of Ichkeria. So I'm almost certain that there is a government in exile, but I know almost nothing about it.
The government is represented by Ahmed Zakayev. I mean, yes, during the wartime, there was a lot of, but obviously Russian propaganda did a lot to that too. So basically, if you are looking at it like either there is government in exile that you can recognize, which is represented by Ahmed Zakayev, or you don't have government and there is nothing to really recognize. I think the choice is obvious. But I think there is a very strong legal case for Ahmed Zakayev because a lot of Chechens do recognize him. The other faction is pretty much dead. So there is this debate cannot continue. Like obviously Ramzan Kadyrov would not recognize Ahmed Zakayev's government, but I think the Chechens that are fighting in Ukraine, they do, and also many Chechens that live in Europe or elsewhere. A lot of Chechens, by the way, live in Arab countries. I think in, I'm not sure which countries exactly, but in Middle East. So pretty much within Chechen community, I think Ahmed Zakayev's government is recognized. He did have some position in, I think he wasn't really Minister of Foreign Affairs, but something to that end. Probably Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs or something. And when he was in London, actually, the discussion was, the group of Chechens that were fighting within Chechnya, they said, stop sitting in London, come back and fight along with us. You are not legitimate. And we are Imarat Kavkaz or something. They declared themselves Imarat. And that was the kind of base for that debate. But Imarat Kavkaz does not exist anymore. Republic of Ichkeria was declared as independent and actually non-Islamic state. I mean, there is, I think this Imarat, there is, it's, again, I'm not expert in these affairs, but the structure of Emirat was purely religious organization, while Republic of Ichkeria was declared as basically independent, and religion was kind of separated, like in other modern, countries. So, yeah, I mean, from legal perspective, the Emirat was probably a dead end, and like I said, there was strong Russian involvement in those years, like you could imagine, right? So this is where it brings us. Ahmed Zakayev is alive. I think I'm not sure whether he travels to Kiev or he is based in Kiev. He gives interview quite often to different media, and I think we'll hear from him very soon.
This is kind of unprecedented, where we have the government of Ukraine recognizing the independence of a territory whose current de facto government, and certainly de jure government under Russian law and arguably international law as well, doesn't even recognize their own independence. Kind of uncharted territory here, even if there is a Chechen sort of self-proclaimed government in exile. I don't know if any other countries are currently recognizing their legitimacy, so uncharted.
Yeah, I think in if you take this case to United Nations, there will be a lot of debate. But at the same time, and this is, by the way, this is Russian opinion. History is written by winners. After war, many things will be clearer. Like Russia wanted to eliminate Ukraine, so Ukraine responded by recognition of Republic of Ichkeria. And we should at least recognize that, it was a real genocide taking place there for many, many, many years. So what we have today in form of Ramzan Kadyrov is definitely, Ramzan Kadyrov himself does not recognize his republic. I honestly don't even know how he kind of positions himself. Now, we obviously know who he is, but yeah, it's interesting. But again, years from now, when you look at books and want to kind of find the date when Republic of Ichkeria was first recognized, it will be without any doubt today. So I think it is a big day in the history of Chechen nation.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Actually, while our language is talking, we had a co-host switch. So Daryl had to leave. And so we welcome Anta to the space. And as usual, it's always a pleasure to co-host with you.
Hi everyone. I'm glad to be here and to see you all up. Good evening to all you guys from North America, and good morning for the early risers in here in Europe. John, I saw you waving while Alex was talking. Do you want to add something up?
Yes, just very briefly regarding Ahmed Zakayev. So his position previously, while Chechnya was in, the actual physical control of its claimed territory, his position, if my memory serves, was he was foreign minister for a few years. Then he became the deputy prime minister, And then I believe sometime in the mid 2000s, while the insurgency was still ongoing, he essentially became the prime minister of the government in exile. So that's his official title, as prime minister of the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria. He's still out and about. I don't know where he currently is or what country he tends to reside in. He's kind of been all over the place, all over Europe, various countries, trying to dodge Russian extradition requests, that kind of thing. The other thing to note is in terms of legal precedent, probably the closest thing that we have is, I would suspect, the Baltic states potentially, during from 1940 to 1992 when the Soviet Union dissolved. That would be it's not a good fit, don't get me wrong, but it's probably it's the closest thing I can personally think of. They maintained governments in exile, all three of them, via their diplomatic services. For example, the U.S. government never recognized either Lithuania, Latvia, or Estonia as part of the Soviet Union, and we retained their diplomatic missions in the United States for 50 years, essentially recognizing them as occupied independent states, as did the United Kingdom and a few other countries in Western Europe. So that's the closest thing I can think of in terms of international legal precedents. As obviously the Baltic states had their own, quote unquote Soviet appointed governments, much as Ramzan Kadyrov is, the appointed government of Chechnya according to Russian law.
Language? You also have your hands up.
Yeah, I saw the article. Oh, I'm sorry. I saw the article from nv.ua about it, which is a phenomenal website, has a lot of stuff. Reading through it, seems like it was announced via Telegram by a member of the party. I'm not really seeing the Ukrainian language media section. So if somebody can help me find that, I've been scrolling through it. And while we're here, this is only very tangentially related. nv.ua is a great Ukrainian news website. It has things in English too. Something I have noticed on the Ukrainian side, and I treat it with a little bit of dark humor, is that they continue to run the gamut for media. It's not just about the war. So there's been a person who, since the war began, has been very intent that they are going to continue to publish their horoscope columns, which, in addition with some of like the best fall fashion requests being right next to, the updates of the actual war, I've always found to be a little, a bit of a, strange thing. But I think it is important to kind of just, you can sort of chuckle at and go, okay, well, this is a person who's still doing their job no matter what circumstance they're in, but also that there is still an element of normalcy being attempted despite the war, and certainly in some areas in Western Ukraine. And I think that that's a wonderful thing.
Thank you.
Sorry, I apologize. No, I tapped the button.
Sorry. Sorry about that. Abdullah, you also have your hands up, and then Dryfly.
Thank you, and thank you, Alex, for bringing up the Ukrainian recognition of Chechnya. I think it was the right move on their part, and the Chechens, as you said, 2 brigades are already fighting on the side of the Ukrainians, because they understand that their struggle and the success of the Ukrainians is intertwined with their own right to self-determination. And I think it was Estonia, I think, that came very close to recognizing the Chechen Republic before succumbing to Russian blackmail. And lastly, if you think about it now, Ukraine is currently at war with 4 countries: Russia, Belarus, Chechnya, and Iran. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dryfly.
Language, got a question for you back on the battle scene. I was reading some reports. A couple different sites were suggesting that the Russians are going to try to turn Kherson into a Bakhmut type situation, or at least that's Putin's intent. He can't run an offensive out of it, so he's going to try to make it a bloody mess. Do you think that that's likely? Do you think it's propaganda, or do you think it's some of both? And I'll listen.
I don't doubt that Putin.
Did we lose language?
Yes, language, you lost audio. After I don't doubt that.
Maybe that was his answer.
We'll drop him and then he'll come back up.
And I'm going to drop down so you have other people up, because that was my only question, and then I'll listen. Thank you.
Thanks, Wi-Fi.
So, until language is coming back up, look. Please don't be afraid to come up and ask your questions if you have questions on Chechnya, since we are on point, or any other thing that was Ukraine related in his presentation, or I don't know, something else. We are here. Language, you're back up. Do you have
Yes, I'm sorry. I know I got cut off. I don't know. It's this weird thing with my phone where I try and turn to landscape mode and it just throws me out of Twitter entirely. So that's probably something I should get fixed. But in very general terms, I don't doubt Russia will try. I don't doubt they may even attempt it, despite the fact that none of them would really be interested in doing that, the ones on the ground. The Ukrainian partisan network in Kherson is substantial. Even, I would argue, they're more than a little chomping at the bit to go to work, as we've seen with a number of explosions, targeted assassinations, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's a major difference between what we've seen in other areas. Really, the one area where Russia even attempted briefly to make an urban defense, which was Liman, and that collapsed very quickly once their supply lines started getting cut. And let's be clear, there's already a river to their back in Kherson. But even should they decide that they want to stick around and fight, despite quite literally every thing against them, they'd not just be fighting against Ukraine troops outside the city, but a number of people inside the city as well in very short order. And I don't think it would go well for them.
Thank you. Gunther? Gunther, do you hear me?
Oh, no, sorry about that. I had a question about a post that you made today around. You mentioned that the Black Sea is very difficult in winter time, and you mentioned that you had talked about that before, and so my request is, could you elaborate that a little bit more?
As I understand, the issue with the Black Sea wintertime is more to do with storms than anything else. I'd have to go back and see exactly what it was, but we already have seen storms in the Black Sea over the last several weeks. I'm not a meteorologist. I won't pretend to understand them, but we've seen more of that, and it actually has restricted Russian naval movement. Not that they move very far away from Crimea these days, but they had drastically dropped their number of warships out in the sea as a result of the storms. And unfortunately, it's also knocked a bunch of the sea mines they've planted off their moorings, which has caused either explosions along the coastline. Thankfully, we haven't seen any of them hit a ship yet, as far as I know, which is something I'm unfortunately just kind of waiting for one of those to drift into a sea lane. But I believe that's what we're referring to. If somebody else can comment more on it, I see we have Constantine here. Other people, if we had Oscar Domesticated, who can maybe speak a little bit more about what the sea is like in the wintertime. But that's about the limit of my knowledge.
I see Colby has his hands up, and I can add something if not touched upon. Colby?
So I won't speak to the Black Sea broadly, but specifically Azov and the Kerch Straits. Stormy weather in the winter season is going to be a very significant concern for Russia and their ability to ship things by ferry across the straits, so long as the bridge is less than functional. So this is something to look for, is that just based on historical precedent, usually in December and January, you'll have a lot of days of the month where the weather conditions and the conditions in the water are such that it does not permit the operation of the ferries that Russia would usually use to transport goods and other cargo across the straits. And I will see if I can find the thread that details all of this that I read today or yesterday.
It's I think it's Chris O.
Yes.
Chris O.
Yeah, I think that's who it was.
Yeah. Regarding Black Sea and especially the north part of Black Sea, Craig also, because he's here, I remember this. He always tries to point us about geography, right? The central eastern part of Ukraine is basically flat. The mountains are on the west side. So when the winds come from the northeast from Siberia during wintertime, they are really chilly, and they freeze. Basically, this is why they freeze. The Azov Sea and impair the traffic. So Black Sea in itself during winter time is windy and rather turbulent. So adding to that wind and a freezing shore, you will have impaired traffic on the ferries, because this is what they have now to transfer goods, right, from Russia to Crimea. Not only goods, but everything they need. So yeah, Craig can help us more, or probably has another question.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it is important to point out that the Kerch Strait bridge was such a big event, not only because of its propaganda value, right, of what it means for Ukraine to be able to do this, and all the traffic jams we see on Google Maps with people trying to make it to their various exits or pre-planned positions in case of, and I think that it had a large strategic value as well. There's no doubt about that, and it's important to emphasize that, because what we really just again need to boil this down to is just, how do I show it? Goods and services, right? What goods and services is Ukraine able to deliver to its armed forces versus Russia? Right, Russia's guys are fighting with flak jackets and bolt action rifles, right? Ukrainians are fighting with body armor. I put a link in the nest. Colby actually superseded it, so it's thanks a lot, man. Just kidding. Swipe to the left, and you're going to see a post there of that is territorial defense. Now, I'm trying to have some discussion to understand, because if you look at their kit, if you look at how they are fitted out, that's some pretty good stuff. That's not a guy with a bolt action rifle or a flak jacket. That's Western style body armor. You can see some of the U.S. stuff on their arms and their shoulders, and of course on the flak jacket. Excuse me, on their chest protector, etc. So, what's interesting is that those videos to me tell such a larger story than merely, say, the Kerch Bridge or these individual things. What you're able to actually get to your people and how they're actually able to utilize it. While those are two different things, you need both to accomplish the same goal, right? And so you could have the most talented soldier in the world, but if all he's got is a 5-round bolt action rifle, then start writing letters home. So just an interesting little nugget that while we do talk about the Kerch Bridge, I think it's important to point out the other side of that, which is Ukrainian logistics and what they're able to provide their people with, whether that be in the Donbass or whether that be around Melitopol.
And just touching on that, we're already seeing massive, I've talked about it a couple of times in the last few weeks, we're seeing massive issues with actually supplying these soldiers. I've gotten a couple DMs from people who are asking, well, what about the Russian conscription that starts at the beginning of next month? This already got moved back a month because they couldn't physically move enough soldiers, among other things, to try and do this concurrently with their mobilization. They're expecting somewhere in the neighborhood of 100, 110,000 people. We'll see how that goes. There's a lot of videos of Russian mobilized units that barely have body armor. They're actually, if you're looking to make a quick buck in Belgorod right now, selling body armor is the way to go. Price has gone up by about 200%. Otherwise, there's been allegations they're getting body armor without armor panels, that they're getting like one gun per couple people and being told the others will arrive before they go to the front, that their officers are nowhere to be seen, that they're frankly not getting enough food in a lot of cases. Just really terrible stuff. And that's in Russia physically. So you can only imagine what the situation is like when there's actively artillery and missiles landing around your transport hubs.
And I just want to add on to that just very quickly. While we're talking about goods and services, it's also important to remember that you have to be intelligent with those superior goods and services, if you will, right? Whether that be electronic warfare or actual small arms ammunition. In regards to a question whether or not you're going to see this urban fight around Kherson, I think what you're seeing around Kherson is going to be an example, like we saw in Kharkiv. It's going to be a mix of the two, of encircling urban areas. But keep in mind, Kherson and Donetsk City are not Liman, nor are they Izum. They're much bigger. But the same methodology of slowly wrapping your hands around, getting a stage separately like you see there, and then avoiding that urban center and then focusing on rear areas, that is probably obviously logistics, right? Can you imagine M777s, 20 miles from the Dnipro River, right? So this all has a cumulative effect. And I just wanted to point out that Ukraine has been smart enough not to enter into these urban battles, right? You don't see them charging headlong into Izum, right? They just went around it. And that's what we're going to see, I feel like, but also a little bit of a mixture of what we see in Kherson, which is setting the stage piece at a time, and then avoiding these heavy urban combats and just focusing on supplies and logistics.
100%. I would be astonished, given everything we've seen, if Russia, A, commits to an urban combat, and B, that Ukraine decides the best way to go about a city of 100,000 of their own people is to sprint right into it. There's a lot of reasons why they wouldn't do that. Historically, aside from arguably Liman, we have not seen instances where Russia really tries to commit to a heavy urban defense. When they get cut off, they pull out. We saw this around Kyiv. We saw this in East Kharkiv. We've seen it in other locations as well. I cannot expect, and those were towns that were much smaller that they arguably had more control over. They have physical control over Kherson. They've subdued a lot of the population, but the circumstances there are very much not in their favor should bullets start flying, especially if you have, just at the very broad level, Ukrainian partisans walking in artillery strikes on Russian positions that they've had mapped out for months.
Not to mention the valuable manpower that you save by not doing stuff like that. No matter how much people want to see Ukrainian troops in the center of Kherson, does not have to play out like that, right? It can play out in a much easier, smarter, right? Work smarter, not harder, right? And in a way that preserves manpower. There will undoubtedly be losses by the Ukrainians, as there are every single day, sadly enough. But now that Konstantin's here, I think I kind of wanted to help. One of the things that I had been confused with, maybe a language in Constantine, Colby can help me out with, and this is what I was talking about in some of our other channels, is the structure of the Ukrainian army, right? Its actual joints, its bones, its muscle, right? So I had a question regarding territorial defense units and how they are integrated or lack thereof, into the proper Ukrainian armed forces, right? And so can we just kind of basically, for the audience, try to map that out so that they understand when we talk about this unit here or that unit there, they understand what it means in the broader scheme of things. Can either of you guys help us out with that?
I'll let Constantine go.
Oh, I was hoping you're gonna take it.
I'll trip over my own self first then, I guess. I think Constantine will know. I certainly knows better about the nuts and bolts and the workings himself. I'm going to speak in real general terms here, so I'm probably going to get some stuff wrong. I'm just going to paint 4 elements of the Ukrainian security services now. You have the Ukrainian military, which is your conventional armed forces. These are the group that has been most bolstered by the mobilization campaigns carried out in Ukraine. So from unit to unit, you have different levels of experience and skill. Frankly, a number of them, even the ones that were just regular civilians on February 23rd, have become more battle-hardened due to the circumstances. The National Guard of Ukraine, which is a smaller group, has not taken nearly as many, as I understand it, of mobilized people, which means that I'm not going to say standards are higher because that would imply that the Ukrainian military is lesser, and I'm not trying to do that. But because we are dealing with a smaller pool of people who have generally been together longer in some units, I've seen that they tend to be a little bit, if you're taking the whole average, including newly mobilized and TDF troops, they tend to be still getting a little bit more of the resources. TDF forces have changed throughout the war. We've seen it go from being hasty defenses, AKs handed out in the streets of Kyiv, to now much more formalized units. There's still issues with getting logistics to them specifically, as I generally understand it. There's still something of a hierarchy, even in just where things go, not only based on need, but also based on which officers know other units exist, rather than just looking on a physical piece of paper and going, I've never heard of this TDF unit, so I'm going to put them first in line. It doesn't really happen. And that's just general logistics stuff. You also have the state border guards, who I think have played an outsized role in this war, despite the fact that they don't really get enough attention. You could think of them as the border patrol. These are, except, they're actively involved in combat. And these are the same folks who are on Snake Island. These are the same folks who were part of the initial delaying efforts against Russian forces all along the territorial border of Ukraine, especially up towards Belarus. And as I understand it, these are also the forces that are broadly responsible, or part of the responsibility, for defending against Russian attacks back into areas of Ukraine that have been liberated, such as what we heard about northwest of Volchansk today. Does that kind of answer the question? Or
Yeah, no, sounds good.
Anybody else have any comments or anything on this topic?
So I will add to this. Well, not add. I will go in parallel because I'm why I don't answer everything. I have so much work right now that I can don't have time, and that's why I may have missed most of what language learners said. But generally, he's right. I will add a couple of things. So territorial defense initially, when it was formed of the units that are supposed to guard their own, like the place where they live, and they were super light, only small firearms. The idea was, to protect bridge, for example, from insurgency. Well, insurgency would be one of the great ideas. A great what? Give me a second. Yeah, so insurgency was one of the biggest targets for territorial defense forces to close. You would plan strategic objects. You would guard strategic objects from insurgency, and at the same time, and insurgency and special forces while at the same time allowing the regular armed forces to focus on fighting in the fields, and like heavy battles. And that was the idea. Then we had a problem with staffing because in Ukraine people just wanted to live normal life. No one wants to fight a war, and we're peaceful people, and we did believe that everything has stopped, and we don't need to go into the war with anyone, and Russia will never attack. But they did. But before that, when it was clear that Russia will attack, we had a law passed that would allow to use territorial defense forces outside its own region. And there was some people who were not happy about that, obviously, because you joined to be close to home, but now you have to go to a different region to fight. And it was somewhat of a problem. But right now, territorial defense forces 90% are used to as designated to protect specific regions where they originate from. However, there are some territorial defense units in Sumy, in Kharkiv, and a couple of other regions that they are more armed than than regular army because they got so much trophies. I know there is one territorial defense brigade that has 20 tanks. Imagine that's more than some of our mechanized brigades have. Because they got them captures, they got them repaired, because they have support of their loved ones. When you serve in the regular military, you don't get that much support because you served there for 20, for 5, 10, 3, 2 years before that. And when you're territorial defense, it's mostly like, okay, I'm going, and all your relatives, all your friends are chipping in the money. So they usually have this um, volunteer cash flowing in, which allows to fundraise for a lot of stuff, such as, for example, repairing equipment, and repairing tanks takes a lot of cash, and this allows to buy parts. And you'd be surprised, lots of the parts for the tanks can be bought, and because most of the things that break are actually it's hoses, it's like you can make them on lathe, and lots of stuff you can build, like accumulators, batteries, car batteries, etc. So you can buy that stuff. It's a bit harder when you do it in the everyday regular army, because you don't have that much support. Of course, your family will support you, but it's not like with territorial defense usually. But at some point, territorial defense units, some of them were becoming, quite a effective force. Some of them were not. Some of them were, there were failures. There is no need to, say that it's absolutely perfect. Some territorial defense forces, battalions, and brigades as a whole have failed, and because the commanders fail to prepare, commanders fail to secure supplies and prepare the troops. But those who have succeeded, there are some that were super effective, and right now some of them are being integrated into the attached to the mechanized brigades and to the air assault brigades, mostly to the mechanized brigades, of course. That's the core of mechanized brigades of Ukrainian armed forces, are the core of Ukrainian armed forces. And that's where they've been attached to help close some gaps. And usually when territorial defense unit is sent to the front line, there is like you'll be surprised, but even though it's a war, it's still voluntary. You're being asked if you want to go there. if you're ready to go there, because no one of us wants to go, with someone who's not ready to fight it, who's gonna panic and run away. So lots of those territorial defense units became volunteers, like volunteer units that went to the front lines, and lots of them did not. Lots of them refused and said, "We're going to stay here. We're going to guard." If you, for example, you imagine that you've been in the. I'm not blaming them on anything. Just saying that. Imagine you've been through the Battle of Kiev and you fought, for 30 days nonstop, and you had your mates die. You had your house destroyed. You've seen enough horrors of war, and now you've been asked, okay, let's go, and let's go further. If you have a choice, lots of us will say, no, I will stay here. It's not as simple as just being heroic and running towards continue this fight. It's trust me, those guys are heroes. They gave their they do what they can, and the fact that, for example, they not many not everyone agrees to go, to continue going, for example, to the east, it doesn't mean that they are cowards or afraid of anything. It just means that every person has its limit, and those are heroes, and not everyone is is a superhero, and not everyone is Superman, and we should keep that in mind. And yeah, I've been rambling for too long, and I will add one more thing about National Guard. I think someone, I'm not sure if Craig asked about National Guard. Did you?
No, I guess I was more interested into how those units were actually integrated into regular army formations, right? And so instead of, I guess, let me try and put a number on it. So if you have 2,000, just grabbing a number, Ukrainian troops in a brigade, you'd have to assign some of those to security, whether it be rear security, supply security, or even logistics to some extent. But instead, some of these territorial defense and other units actually supplemented that brigade, if you will, right? So that brigade now can dedicate more of its regular forces to combat roles. I know that seems somewhat like wonkish, but I'm trying to get an idea as to how that integration took place, because you kind of pointed it out that there's a little bit of a personality clash there, right? There's a little bit of and I'm not saying it's a negative thing. Sometimes it's good, it's healthy. Um, but yeah, just kind of the basic integration of some of these units that originally didn't have any real desire to want to serve in the regular army, right? But now do.
Yeah, that's essentially what happened. A lot of territorial defense units got integrated into mechanized brigades. They were, integrated into them, and they are doesn't mean they are there forever. It means they are attached to them temporarily, and they are under control of, of the brigade commander at this given point. In the same time, in the next couple of I don't know, days, weeks, they can be detached and put into to the other task. But that's the way how it's been the same in 2014. We've been I have served in this. We have those separate battalions. When it's separate, it means that it's an own unit with an own organization, like it has its own unit commander. It's not like platoon that it has its own documents. It has its own staff, it has its own stamp, for example. It has its own bank account, and same for the territorial defense. But this unit would be attached into the specific brigade, to be under their control, to help them in the specific task. For example, if you have a brigade that is pushing through to the Kupiansk, you need someone to secure your backlines, and you don't want to overstretch your forces and say, okay, like let's keep a company over here behind just to because it is according to the book. You know that this is you're capable. Heavy armor, heavy weaponized. They have they have mortars, they have tanks, they have BTRs, etc. You want them to be performing the role that they do the best. And at the same time, you have territorial defense that there is light infantry that does not have a training to fight in the fields, for example, does not have an assault training. You would tell them to you would use this unit to just hold the rear lines and clean up all those all those units that are scattered after the advances. Or alternatively, you can imagine that if Simple Brigade, it has been in case multiple times as well, specifically around Luhansk axis, where I'm not talking about the advance in the north. I'm talking more about Lysychansk, Severodonetsk, and north of Bakhmut, where territorial defense units were put actually to hold the positions. Because the brigade was not capable and the Russian forces were just overwhelming. It did not usually work out too well, but it did happen. There are lessons to be learned from there. There are some territorial defense units that actually can do that pretty well, but in general, it's not what they're designed for. It's not what they're mentally ready for. Because you have to have to be ready um, to do this. You have to have a lot of training. You have to have this understanding what is happening around you, not only have an AK and a grenade launcher and sitting there and saying, oh, okay, I'm gonna stop everything. Because you have, actually a regular Russian army advancing towards you, which is people laugh, but it's not like people say. It's complete idiots that they don't know what to do. For some reason, there is a notion that because Russia is losing to Ukraine, is not because Ukrainian armed forces know what they do, and it's because the Russians are stupid. It's not always like that, but yeah, it's territorial defense is used in a different way. How we call it, plug into every hole that's leaking. It's unfortunate, but the war is a war, and we're facing overwhelming forces of Russian Federation, and to fight them, we have to do that.
Thank you, thank you, Konstantin. That is that was really interesting. Language, you have your hands up.
Right. Actually, for a slightly different topic, but I know that Gunther's had his hands up for a while, so I'll kind of tease folks. Somebody actually, as much as I was just not mocking, but kind of lightly poking fun at the lady who does horoscopes in the Ukraine paper, there's actually a really important piece of information in there that I just kind of stumbled across. So I probably should learn to bite my tongue more often in the future. But maybe we can go to Gunther first, and then I'll kind of wrap up with that point.
No. We want to know. We really want to know. Go for it.
There will be a partial solar eclipse over eastern Ukraine a week from today. It will reach about 50% totality on a angled line between Kyiv and Kherson. It's not going to be full. It's not going to blot out the sun. It's not going to be quite like that. That's going to happen closer to Kazakhstan. But for a lot of areas in Ukraine, for about 2.5 hours, you're going to see a reduction in sunlight. And who knows? Maybe that means something, maybe it doesn't. But that was just something that kind of popped up in between me figuring out whether Taurus or Gemini is in retrograde.
Sorry, Gunther. You go, please.
Okay, so I don't know. I was going to ask something about Melitopol, but since you brought this up, there has been, I have had this perception several times throughout this conflict that there's obviously like foolishness and terribleness on the Russian part and bravery and excellence on the Ukrainian part. But it does seem to me cosmologically a little bit that there has been an element of luck, like a ghost of Kiev out there at times helping make things happen, because there were so many, it seems like so many sort of like close calls or things that were pretty dicey, particularly at the beginning there. Anyway, it's just a thought I had. So my question is more about Melitopol. So obviously if Ukraine could, they would strike out in all directions at once, but because of you have to conserve your forces, they want to probably focus on Kherson, presumably. But my question is there a point, even if they haven't fully captured that area, that they could be in a position basically to shift forces and drive on Melitopol? And realistically, what is the earliest like that something could happen?
So it's a good question. As far as the first part, I think the best adage is it takes a lot of work to get lucky. That people often don't see. It's about having the capability to do things when the situation presents itself. So let's not quite just, I'm not saying you're disparaging them, but let's not ignore that part. Ukraine's been essentially training and living through this in its eastern regions for 8 years now, and it's not all necessarily just happenstance because the Russians suck, which they do. As far as Melitopol, technically Ukraine could go next day. If they are willing to suffer for it, they could make an attempt. I don't know if that's necessarily what they want to do. It certainly probably would be the best time and place for it. I imagine when the time, place, and circumstances all make sense is when we'll see Ukraine push for Melitopol. I would argue it's relatively distinct from the Kherson offensive because the Russian troops in Kherson cannot necessarily redeploy over there, and at least those across the river. And there's benefits to going while they're still on the far side of the river versus once they retreated. And just to drop in and back, we were talking about Kherson proper. As I understand it, or at least one of the concerns that's been expressed by some folks there that I chat with, is that Russia would pull out, and then they would just start trying to level Kherson with artillery from across the river. That's been a concern iterated a number of times, so I don't know necessarily how that would factor into it. The idea being that, sure, you can kick the Russians across the river, but now you have to do more. The battle doesn't just stop there because now you have a fairly large population center under the threat of very real terror bombing. So that's also something to consider when we're talking about who moves when. And then I know we got a couple hands up, and then after that, there's a couple questions in the DMs that I promised I'd answer, and then I will have to go.
Yeah, go ahead, Colby.
On this Melitopol question, according to the Russians, Ukrainians have made very significant investments in their defensive lines along this front, including very considerable minefields. You don't do that unless you intend to maintain a defensive posture for some period of time. Secondly, where we are in the season now, it is incredibly unlikely that Ukraine would undertake a new major offensive operation in this area, given that we're now fairly deep into autumn and the Bezdarezhia. The roads are bad. This is open country, very good for armored warfare, but not if the ground is a mess. So I wouldn't expect any major offensive operations on this front until the ground freezes solid.
Great, thank you. I have a question for either Language or maybe Colby or somebody else from my DMs. So this is just around the thought that next week there potentially is Russia is having nuclear drills, and if anyone's worried that they're going to do something under the guise of drills.
Next question. Just kidding.
That
was a
No.
joke. Sorry.
Yeah, the long answer is probably not. And the short answer is no. It could. I don't think that they're necessarily going to do much more than what we've already seen under the gauge of nuclear drills. Frankly, there are also NATO nuclear drills. Did you say next week or next month? I'm sorry.
Next week.
Next
That
week.
that
So
was what
around,
that was what the listener thought. I don't know when it is.
so there's ongoing U.S. nuclear drills going on over Europe as we speak. It would be exceptionally stupid for Russia to try and play some game with a ballistic missile while there's actively nuclear equipped NATO bombers in the air flying around. So I would expect that's going to be part and parcel for regular, sort of events such as these. I don't think it's necessarily going to impact the Ukraine war. I don't think you're going to suddenly see, a bomber break off and start flying towards Kiev, because these things are usually coordinated a little bit ahead of time. And anything that starts to go awry, I imagine, would get a very quick phone call of, "Hey, Putin, what the hell are you doing?" Because that can escalate very dramatically and very unpredictably if people get real stupid with it. And historically, thank God, we haven't. So
Thank you. I think you had a few DMs as well, didn't you?
yes, a lot of them about the dam near Novokakhovka. So it's the Russian assertion, and I don't believe it's accurate. I don't think any of these people who are sending it to me believe it's accurate. But if the dam were to be destroyed, Russia claims it's Ukraine. I've seen a couple people say, well, could this be Russia setting the stage for some sort of attack that they carry out, trying to muddy the waters as a way to impede Ukrainian forces on the far side of the river? It's possible. I hope it's not the case, because I think Chuck Farrow was just in here talking about it. This would basically dry up the water supply for Crimea overnight. And that's not a good thing, because that was a major issue in Crimea early on, frankly, for the last several years. After Russians took the peninsula, Ukraine said, well, you're not getting water, and they dammed the site. That specific dam was, like, first 48 hours, one of the spots that Russia blew up, because it was causing a not inconsiderable amount of unrest in Crimea when you can't get water every single time that you want it, right? And it costs a lot of money to ship it in. As far as flooding goes, I don't think that would materially change things on the battlefield. I want to say it floods more towards the south side of the river than the north side. There's a bit of an elevation change there, so it would turn it into swampland, but it's not a huge benefit, so much so. And the fact that it would basically immediately dry up, or start the process of drying up Crimea, because they do have several months of water now, would be significant enough. I don't see Russia doing that, especially with the risk that now we recognize the Kerch Strait Bridge can be attacked. That's always been something, say that, okay, if Ukraine, for whatever reason, can't militarily go into Crimea, if they blow this dam, cut the water, and they detonate that bridge, it's going to become very untenable to be a Russian living in Crimea in very short order. And then the secondary question, what is Ukraine's capacity to repair the damages made to their critical civilian infrastructure? Is Ukraine able to rapidly repair the critical infrastructure, such as power plants for heating and electricity, on a mass scale if these terror attacks continue? Demonstrably, yes, to a point. There are certain things that just take longer. There's very large electric infrastructure that you cannot adequately just slap together and repair. So unfortunately, there is a bit of a difference between repairing damaged physical structures and the actual infrastructure behind them. And that's why there are concerns that Russia is going to continue trying to use heat or cold as a weapon going into the winter. How many drones and long-range missiles does Iran even have left to sell to Russia? I can't imagine a country like Iran would have many to sustain Russia's rate of attrition. Iran likely has considerable amounts. We actually had a person from Iran who was in here, I want to say yesterday or the day before, who was mentioning that it's really just the whole Iranian strategy is, quantity has a quality all to its own. The idea being that if there's a U.S. aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf, that if they have one giant, Iranian fleet, it'd be sunk in short order. But if they have 100 small boats with rockets on them, well, maybe 3 or 4 of them get through and do some damage. They've applied that broadly to their missile program as well, given who they exported to, both, people in Lebanon, in areas around Israel, and other areas around the world, where, sure, you're going up against more modern air defenses, So we might as well make a quantity of them that can just burst through with sheer numbers. And that's unfortunately what we've seen with the Shahid drones. I suspect that they don't have, 1,000 ready to ship, 2,000 ready to ship. The numbers that we've seen about, Russia's ordered 2,500, 1,700, that's probably for a whole production order. That's not something that they physically have ready yet, and not that they're going to be able to get in the next couple weeks. And then how much do each of the drones and missiles generally cost? And Constantine might know more about the actual cost for the Shahid drones. I was led to believe that they were somewhere around 25,000. I may be wildly underestimating that there. And then the last question was, yeah, we already touched on that in the Crimean water supply and whatnot. Thank you.
Quick comment on the price. You are right, and those were numbers, estimates on the by the experts. It's you probably heard me say a different number. That's because it's my just personal estimate based, on the experience and from what I see, how much it actually takes to make a drone, not from from the someone who has intelligence on how much Russia has been charged. But you're right on what experts are saying. It's around $25,000, they say.
Well, like you said, it's entirely possible it could be more. As I've tried to dive into it, it seems like a lot of people are basically pulling from the same singular article written actually this year, but people are going off of one data point for the 25,000, which, as best I can tell, does originally sort of come from Iranian media. So who knows how accurate that is? I would not be surprised if you're accurate here and Iran is trying to make it seem like they can pump out, one of these for less than the price of a Toyota Corolla every day as a way to try and increase their sales or increase their, people's fear that they have tens of thousands of these things.
Is 25K an estimate of production cost or what Russia's paying per unit?
I think that was the estimate of cost for Iran. I don't think there's been an estimate on exactly how much Russia's paying. I think the idea came out because they were just kind of giving them out to like the Houthis and other folks.
Craig, do you want to add to this? Or do you have a different topic?
No, I simply just wanted to try and touch on that water source in the Crimea again. The question that kind of bounced around my head is, what is it going to be like when Ukrainian forces are on the eastern side of that water channel? Because to my knowledge, it's just a single water canal, right? Or aqueduct, however you want to describe it, right? That's supplying Crimea with all its water. And if the Ukrainians control that, then I think it's going to be an important question to ask. What do the Ukrainians do with that, right? The more Russia strikes civilian targets in Kharkiv with these drones, the more it's going to maybe not be under political pressure to do something in regards to that water supply. Not sever it to hurt people, but that discussion has to be had, I think, at some point amongst people who obviously have somewhat higher ranks than we do here. But I'd be interested to see what those thoughts might be. How hard is Russia willing to fight for it, or maybe not at all, because they feel like Ukraine doesn't want the propaganda value of the beneficial Russian propaganda value of somehow harming Russians in Crimea?
I think it is a good question. That's part of the reason why at this point, I'm operating under the impression that Putin is not necessarily coming to terms with the fact that Kherson is rapidly becoming an untenable position for him, and also believing that no matter what, we cannot and will not lose Crimea as part of Russian soil. Arguably, I think he's right there from his perspective of being self-serving. Losing Crimea after you've spent 8 years and billions of dollars trying to paint it as the latest territory of the Rodina would be incredibly damaging to his political aspirations. Would it be the death sentence? Who knows? Would it be very much a bad thing? Yes. So if he's operating under that impression that they're not going to blow the bridge from Crimea to Russia tomorrow and tell everybody to leave, then I would suspect he doesn't want to start running into issues with the water supply again. Who knows? They've made decisions that don't make sense before. They'll make them in the future. But that's part of the reason why I don't necessarily believe that all these statements from Russian media about the Ukrainians are going to blow up the dam is anything more than some way to try and motivate people to leave the region. I wouldn't say I'd be very surprised, but I would be somewhat surprised if Russia actually detonates the dam in some way that would cause them severe long-term issues in their idealized future.
Nick, good evening and
Good
welcome.
good evening or good morning, as the case may be. Um, on the drones, I learned earlier today from from the British newspaper, The Telegraph, that the drones are about 20,000, the Shahed drones, and that they don't think that the Iranian capacity for manufacturing them can match the Russian need to swarm them. So this, even despite the simplicity and cheapness of these things, even unless Russia starts to try manufacturing them themselves, which is I suppose a possibility, although I don't know if Iran would want to okay that, because it's probably a cash cow for them. But anyhow, it seems to be a more of a short-term terror weapon than a long-term thing, no matter how horrific it is. And I also wanted to comment. This is just a sort of a general comment after weeks of wondering when, how soon the big Ukrainian counteroffensives are going to be. It's finally dawning on me that a three-word term I learned from in a sports context actually applies to this too, and it's that patience is the shortcut. In other words, the swiftest way for Ukraine to rid itself of these parasitic invaders is to wait them out, let winter decimate them, let their logistical incompetence denigrate them to the point where they'll melt away under the slightest pressure. And frankly, since Ukraine seems to be probably well equipped for a winter campaign, and Russia seems to be completely unequipped for a winter campaign, we may see dramatic effects after the Rasputitsa. And we should probably all be patient before then, even though that necessarily implies more civilian suffering in the Russian occupied areas. And that's pretty much all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm gonna head out, but Colby, real quick, we'll just hijack it together. Found some more information on the Sabaran forces in Iran. So I'll send it over to you. Comes from a New York Times article, and I'm trying to trace it back on Iranian Twitter now. But basically, a bunch of guys showed up on the streets in Tehran wearing sort of distinctive military uniforms that are very much not the Basiji technical paramilitary troops. These guys would be essentially the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Special Forces, and they tend to be just as ideologically motivated, if not more so, than other members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. So they'd be more willing to commit acts of extreme violence against their own people than perhaps some of the Basiji forces that we've already seen. Unfortunately, they also do have some of the receipts to back it up, given the actions they've taken in Iraq and other countries, and frankly in Afghanistan. They were there with us in 2001, among other locations. So I'll send that article over to you. If other people are interested in it, I'll try and kick it over to them through DM. But I've got the text, the audio up in the nests, most recently on my profile. Please do take a look at it, retweet it. The more people that look at it, the more comments I get, the better I can improve going forward. As always, if you have Ukrainian language media or Russian language media that you think is useful, please do send it over to me. I'm always looking for new sources. And with that, thank you guys so much for hosting. Michelle, Anda, Craig, Colby, Constantine, everyone. It's always a pleasure and a privilege. And have a wonderful evening. Bye.
Thank you, language. It's always very nice when you come up and talk to us and tell us what has happened. Well, Michelle, since we are at the thank you point, we have a lot of excellent speakers on the panel. So I would like to thank them for coming up and for talking to us. And if anyone has questions for them, please join us. And I was also wondering, while we wait a little bit for the speakers to come up, I was wondering if you can tell us a bit what is about to come as guest speakers, special speakers in the following days.
Yeah, thank you. And we've actually been really fortunate the last, I think it's been a few weeks now. We've had some really amazing special guest speakers. And once again, tomorrow we have another great speaker. Prince earlier on had mentioned how excited she is to have this speaker. So her name is Alexandra Drake, and she's going to be speaking tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and that's Wednesday, October 19th. She was an advisor to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense from 2019 to 2020, and she's currently a voice for international advocacy for the Center for Civil Liberties, and that's in Ukraine. So Prince had actually tweeted or responded to the tweet in the MriyaReport under Alexandra Drake's card, and she had spoken at the UN, I think it was back in September. So anyways, Prince had posted that. So if you want to check it out, feel free. And that's going to be tomorrow, Wednesday, October 19th at 11 a.m. Eastern. The other thing I wanted to mention as well is that we do have a few bi-weekly guests that are going to be arriving, or they're going to be speaking on a regular basis. And the first one's going to be this Friday. And so it's our first of what we're calling the bi-monthly series with Ivana Stradner. And she's also going to have a special guest. It's Ulia Sabina. And that's going to be starting at 4 p.m. Eastern. So this is, like I mentioned, a bi-weekly report, which I think is really exciting for this space. And Uliana Sabina Joja is a director for the Frontier Europe Initiative. And she's also a professor at Georgetown University. So we're really excited to have her on. So if you get the opportunity, feel free to join us tomorrow. And then, of course, on Friday as well. Oh, I see Prince's hand come up. So she's probably going to be able to share more about the UN talk. Go ahead, Prince.
Michelle, you in trouble. I was just finishing my pool game on my phone, and I was going to come up and do my little spiel.
I beat you to it.
You did, because now there's a new host. I'm sure there's people here who have heard me say this more than once today, and they probably all want to smack me, and that's fine. No, I found this. I ran across this woman, Alexandra Drake. You said her name better than I think I do. While watching a UN Security Council meeting, and what she spoke on was the condition of POWs, Ukrainian POWs in Russian custody. And she also spoke of the experience of Ukrainians going through the filtration camps. And it was a really in-depth and moving 10, 12 minutes that she spoke. So I'm not going to, belabor it a whole lot, because I've done this now 3 times, and I'll probably do it at least one more time before I go to bed. But there's a pinned tweet on my profile, which has a YouTube link to what she said at the UN Security Council meeting. So if you want to watch that and get an idea of the kinds of things she may be sharing with us, she's also was in Washington D.C. for the UN General Assembly and had some good meetings at that. So, and if you check out her Twitter profile, you'll see some things along those lines also. So I'm just very, very excited for this guest. When Joseph comes up later, assuming he comes up later, he can probably tell you how I hounded him today because I thought he was responsible for putting the cards out, but I discovered he wasn't responsible, but he sure got a mouthful from me. Uh, but it's all good. We all work together, no matter how official or unofficial our roles are in the MriyaReport. We work together to make sure that we bring the best guests best guests. And I think that this one is going to be a really exceptional one who has some very unique knowledge on some of the harder things to hear, but the things that are important to hear. So thank you, Michelle. And you know, I was just teasing you about taking my thunder.
No, of course. You did such a great job explaining it and her and way more than I could have. I was just going to ask you though, like, was there anything? I mean, some of the stories that you shared was already very compelling, but was there anything that really stood out to you? Like, why was it her that you were really drawn to?
Because she was able to sit there and tell you testimony that she had received firsthand from somebody who had gone through a filtration camp and what their experience was going through that filtration camp. And somebody who had been, and I know we've heard from prisoners of war and their experiences, and we've seen multiple examples of that. But what I found, hers was her testifying in early September was one of the first examples I heard of it, and that was just very compelling to me. And I think what means even more is the group of people she's speaking to. She's speaking to the United Nations Security Council. Now, I know the United Nations Security Council doesn't mean a whole lot. I wish it meant a whole lot more than it does, but Russia and its veto means that it doesn't mean as much as it should. But she's standing, she was testifying via video link, but she's sitting there and, among these important people at the United Nations, sharing the reality of what is happening in Ukraine and in Russia as Russians are taking Ukrainians back to Russia and how Russians are treating Ukrainians while in custody, and being able to relay multiple stories of those situations to the people in power. It really touched me and it really meant a lot to me. And she just did it very eloquently and very well. And being a Ukrainian, she has a good voice to speak on it, and looking more into her and her past experience and what she does now. She's passionate about it, and it means something to her to be able to share those stories with people. So I'm not exactly sure what they're going to focus on, because it sounds like she has a pretty broad range of knowledge. She's very, very well spoken and said things that needed to be said. And I appreciated listening to her. And I just thought, this is the kind of thing that needs to be amplified. This is the kind of thing that people need to hear, to know exactly what truly is happening. And I know we hear it, in this space on a regular basis, but to be able to hear it, hear it from just another reliable source means something too. So, yeah, I mean, I could, it's interesting. I'll tell you one little story because nobody has their hand up. Yesterday, I was talking to my brother, and my brother and I see the world very, very differently on different ends of all kinds of spectrums and things like that. And I said to him, I said, so do you want to hear the craziest things the Russians have done lately, like flying a plane into an apartment building? And he's like, where do you get this information? Because, if you could tell me, where you're getting this information that is, that you're telling me and you're sending me pictures of, that I can share with other people, that will help other people understand what's really going on, because the news sources they're reading aren't covering it like this, aren't covering the realistic thing, aren't showing, what's really happening. But you seem to know what's happening 10 minutes after it happens. And I said, well, I get a lot of it from Twitter, but there are some also very good and accurate Ukrainian news sources. And those are the ones that I would be checking out to see the information. I'll go ahead and text some of those to you. So I was able to go ahead and send him the Kyiv Independent, the Kyiv Post, the Pravda, I can't remember the name of it in English. Anyway.
Pravda.
Yes, 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 yes.
It means truth.
Yes. So I was able to send him a few articles and those few websites, so that now he can go and find out what's really happening in a much quicker way than just by watching Western news sources, especially ones that one newscaster's on that Yehuda really never likes to talk about, Tucker Carlson. And they can get some accurate information among their group of friends and share it among people who may not be the most inclined to support Ukraine in this situation, and just knowing that they're getting that accurate information. And so, to tie that back to the speaker that we're going to have tomorrow, me being able to say, I spoke to, I heard from this person in person, basically, on the phone call thing, that this is what has happened. I've been able to say that with other guests, like Roman, our firefighter. Well, I was able to talk to somebody last night who was digging up a mass grave and saw all of these horrific things that I tell him about. So I was, so to be able to say that you've heard somebody say it firsthand is